Before the story begins, subscribe to the channel and leave a like for more chilling tales and unforgettable mysteries.
The call came in at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late October, jolting me awake from the kind of deep sleep that only comes after a 16-hour shift in America's largest national forest. My satellite phone's harsh ring echoed through my small ranger station at the edge of Tongass National Forest, and I knew before I even answered that something was wrong. Nobody calls a remote ranger station in southeast Alaska at that hour unless someone is missing, hurt, or dead. I fumbled for the phone in the darkness, my hand knocking over the cold coffee mug from yesterday's patrol. The voice on the other end belonged to my supervisor, Ezekiel Porter, and the controlled panic in his tone made my blood run cold. "Ranger Morrison, we have a situation at the old Wolverine Creek cabin, the one that's been closed for renovation since August. A pilot flying supplies to Ketchikan spotted smoke coming from the chimney yesterday evening. That cabin is supposed to be empty, locked, and sealed. No permits issued. No maintenance crews scheduled. I need you to check it out." I sat up, instantly alert. The Wolverine Creek cabin was a good 40 miles into the wilderness, accessible only by float plane or a grueling 2-day hike through some of the densest temperate rainforest on Earth. More importantly, it had been the site of an incident 3 months ago that we still didn't fully understand. A family of 4 had gone missing from that cabin, leaving behind all their gear, food still on the table, and no sign of struggle. We'd searched for weeks and found nothing, not even tracks. "The weather's turning bad," Ezekiel continued. "Storm system moving in from the Gulf. You've got maybe 12 hours before we're socked in for days. Can you make it?" I was already pulling on my boots, the leather stiff with dried mud from yesterday's patrol. "Give me 30 minutes to prep. I'll take the boat up to the trailhead and hike in from there. Be careful, Morrison. Something about this doesn't feel right. Check in every 2 hours. If I don't hear from you by nightfall, I'm sending backup." The line went dead, leaving me alone with the sound of wind rattling the station's windows. Outside, the Tongass stretched for 17 million acres of shadow and secrets. And somewhere in that vast wilderness, smoke was rising from a cabin that should have been empty. I gathered my gear methodically, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. Rain jacket, emergency shelter, flare gun, satellite phone, GPS beacon, first aid kit, enough food for 3 days. My service weapon, a Glock 20, went into its holster on my hip. We carried them mainly for bears, but after 15 years as a ranger in Alaska, I'd learned that sometimes the most dangerous things in the forest walked on 2 legs. The boat ride up the channel was rough. October seas churning gray and hostile beneath a sky the color of old pewter. Sitka spruce and western hemlock crowded down to the waterline, their bases disappearing into veils of mist that made the forest look like it was floating. I'd made this journey hundreds of times, but this morning felt different. The usual chatter of birds was absent. Even the sea lions that normally lounged on the rocks near the trailhead were gone. I secured the boat at the small dock we'd built for backcountry access and shouldered my pack. The trail to Wolverine Creek cabin was officially closed for the season. Orange tape stretched across the entrance with a laminated sign warning of hazardous conditions. I ducked under it and started walking. The Tongass has a way of swallowing sound. Within minutes of entering the tree line, the ocean's roar faded to nothing, replaced by the soft drip of condensation from the canopy and the squish of moss beneath my boots. The trail was overgrown, devil's club reaching across the path with thorny stems that could pierce through leather gloves. I pushed through carefully, noting fresh broken branches that suggested someone else had come this way recently. The breaks were maybe 2 days old, the exposed wood not yet darkened by moisture. 3 miles in, I found the first sign that something was seriously wrong. A backpack, expensive and nearly new, sat in the middle of the trail. The rain cover was still on, manufacturer's tags attached. I photographed it and checked the contents. Camping gear, all high-end, enough food for a week. A wallet with California driver's license belonging to someone named Sarah Chen, age 28. Her credit cards and $300 cash were still inside. Nobody abandons a pack like this unless they're running from something or someone. I tried calling Ezekiel, but the satellite phone just gave me static. The canopy was too thick here, the signal blocked by hundreds of feet of biomass above my head. I'd have to wait for a clearing. The trail continued to climb, switchbacking up the mountain through groves of yellow cedar and stands of berry bushes already stripped clean by bears fattening for winter. Every few hundred yards, I found more signs of disturbance. A torn piece of fabric caught on a branch, a hiking pole bent at an impossible angle and discarded in the underbrush, deep gouges in the soft bark of a hemlock that looked almost like claw marks, but too high up to be from any bear. By noon, I'd covered 8 miles and climbed 2,000 feet. The forest was changing, the coastal rainforest giving way to subalpine meadows dotted with mountain hemlock. This should have been where I got my satellite signal back. But when I tried the phone again, all I got was a strange, rhythmic interference, like breathing translated into static. The weather was deteriorating rapidly. What had started as a light mist was now a steady rain, and I could see darker clouds massing to the west. The temperature was dropping too, my breath visible now in small puffs that disappeared into the gray air. I picked up my pace. At mile 12, I found the second backpack. This one was shredded, the fabric torn apart with a violence that made my hand move instinctively to my weapon. The contents were scattered across 20 feet of trail, sleeping bag ripped open, synthetic insulation hanging from branches like strange moss. A tent, still in its stuff sack, had been hurled so hard against a tree that the aluminum poles had bent inside the bag. The food was gone, but not in the way a bear would take it. Bears are messy, but predictable. This was selective, almost intelligent. All the freeze-dried meals were missing, but the energy bars and trail mix were untouched, ground into the mud. I found the ID in a side pocket that had somehow survived the destruction. Michael Chen, age 31. Same address as Sarah Chen. They were traveling together then, but where were they now? The rational part of my brain, the part trained in search and rescue protocols, said I should mark the location, return to the boat, and call for backup. But another part, the part that had kept me alive through 15 years of Alaska's wilderness, whispered that going back now would mean never finding the Chens alive. Weather was closing in. By the time I could return with help, the trail would be washed out, evidence destroyed, and 2 more people would join the growing list of those who simply vanished in the Tongass. I kept going. The final approach to Wolverine Creek Cabin took me through a section of forest that had been devastated by windstorm 2 winters ago. Massive spruce lay crisscrossed like giant pickup sticks, forcing me to climb over and under trunks wider than I was tall. It was exhausting work, and by the time I glimpsed the cabin through the trees, I was soaked with sweat despite the cold. Smoke was indeed rising from the chimney, a thin gray line against the darker gray of the sky. The cabin itself was a standard Forest Service structure, built in the 1960s from local logs, maintained over the decades as a shelter for backcountry travelers. Single room, wood stove, bunks for 6, an outhouse 50 feet back in the trees. Simple, functional, and currently occupied by someone who had no business being there. I approached carefully, staying in the tree line, circling the structure to get a full view. The windows were dark, covered from inside with what looked like emergency blankets, the reflective material creating mirrors that showed only the forest. The door was closed, but I could see fresh mud tracked across the small porch. Multiple boot prints, different sizes, going in but not coming out. I checked my satellite phone one more time. Still that strange rhythmic static, louder now, almost like words just below the threshold of comprehension. My GPS showed the right coordinates, but the compass was spinning slowly, unable to find north. Standard protocol said to announce myself, make contact, assess the situation. But every instinct I had was screaming danger. The missing family in July, the Chen's abandoned gear, the wildlife that had fled this part of the forest. Something had turned this place into a dead zone, and whoever was in that cabin was either its cause or its victim. I drew my weapon and approached the door. The porch boards creaked under my weight, the sound impossibly loud in the unnatural quiet. I knocked, identified myself as a federal officer, and waited. No response. I knocked again, harder this time. The sound echoed inside, suggesting a space larger than the cabin's modest exterior would indicate. When I tried the door handle, it turned easily. Too easily. The lock mechanism had been removed entirely, leaving just a hole where the deadbolt should have been. The door swung inward on hinges that should have squeaked but didn't, revealing a darkness that seemed to eat the gray afternoon light. The smell hit me first. Wood smoke mixed with something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in a warm place. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam penetrating only a few feet into the black interior before being swallowed. The emergency blankets over the windows weren't just blocking light from getting out. They were preventing it from getting in. I stepped inside, weapon raised, flashlight beam sweeping left to right. The cabin's single room had been transformed. The bunks were gone, broken apart and stacked against the walls like a barricade. In the center of the floor, someone had drawn symbols in what looked like mud but smelled like copper. The symbols hurt to look at, their geometry somehow wrong, as if they existed in more dimensions than my brain could process. The wood stove was burning, but the fire inside wasn't consuming wood. Dark shapes writhed in the flames, and I had to look away when I realized they were moving independently of the fire's natural motion. A sound from the corner made me spin, finger on the trigger. A figure sat hunched against the wall, knees drawn up, face hidden behind tangled hair. The clothing suggested a woman, but something about the proportions was off. The arms were too long, fingers splayed against the floor like pale spiders. Sarah Chen? I kept my weapon trained on the figure. Sarah, I'm Ranger Morrison with the Forest Service. Are you hurt? The head lifted slowly, hair parting to reveal a face that had once been human. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but arranged subtly wrong, as if someone had tried to reconstruct a face from memory and gotten the distances incorrect. When she smiled, there were too many teeth. She speaks to us now. The voice came from the Sarah thing, but also from the walls, the floor, the fire itself. A harmonics that made my bones ache. She showed us the true forest, the one that exists beneath, behind, between. Where's Michael? Where's your husband? The thing that had been Sarah Chen tilted its head at an angle that would have snapped a normal neck. He's part of it now, part of her. Like the others, the family that came before, the rangers who searched for them, all part of her now. I backed toward the door, keeping my light and weapon on the creature. Who is she? What are you talking about? The old one. The one who came before the trees, before the water, before the mountains wore names. She's waking up. The forest is just her dream, and dreams end. Movement in my peripheral vision made me turn. The symbols on the floor were shifting, crawling across the wood like living things. The fire in the stove flared, and in its light, I saw shapes emerging from the walls themselves. Human faces pressed against the inside of the logs, mouths open in silent screams. I recognized one of them, Phineas Brandt, a ranger who'd gone missing 2 years ago during a routine patrol. His eyes tracked my movement, pupils dilated with an intelligence that wasn't his own. You need to come with me, I said to the Sarah thing, though I knew it was pointless. There are people looking for you. Your family is worried. It laughed, a sound like branches breaking in a storm. Family, such a small word for such a small idea. She offers more, communion with the infinite, freedom from the lie of individuality. The creature stood, unfolding from the corner, with too many joints bending in too many directions. In the stuttering beam of my flashlight, I saw that what I'd taken for clothing was actually skin, stretched and molded into a grotesque parody of human dress. Its feet never quite touched the floor, hovering inches above the writhing symbols. You'll understand soon, Ranger Morrison. She knows you're here. She's been calling you for years. Every tree you've passed, every trail you've walked, you've been moving through her thoughts. And now you're exactly where she wants you. The walls began to pulse like a massive heartbeat. The faces trapped in the wood opened their mouths wider, and sound poured out, not quite screaming, not quite singing, but something between that made my vision blur. The emergency blankets over the windows started to tear, letting in not the gray afternoon light but something else, a phosphorescent glow that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. I ran, not a controlled tactical withdrawal, not a strategic retreat, I ran like a terrified animal, crashing through the door and off the porch, my pack abandoned, keeping only my weapon and the desperate need to get away from whatever was happening in that cabin. Behind me, I heard the Sarah thing laughing, the sound multiplying as if a dozen throats had joined in. The forest around the cabin was changing. Trees that had stood for centuries writhed like they were in pain, bark splitting to reveal not wood but something red and pulsing. The ground beneath my feet became uncertain, solid one moment, viscous the next, as if the earth itself was only semi-real. I ran down the trail, branches whipping at my face, roots trying to tangle my feet. The windfall trees I'd climbed over earlier were moving, slowly but deliberately, repositioning themselves to block my escape. I vaulted over one just as it rolled into my path, landed hard on the other side, kept running. The rain had turned to something else, drops that burned where they touched exposed skin, leaving marks that looked like tiny handprints. The sky above the canopy was no longer gray, but a sick yellow-green, the color of infected wounds. Lightning flickered without thunder, revealing things in the shadows between the trees that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist, but were reaching for me anyway. My satellite phone started shrieking, an electronic wail that cut through the chaos. I grabbed it, thinking maybe I'd finally gotten a signal, but the screen showed only those same symbols from the cabin floor, scrolling endlessly, burning themselves into my retinas so I could see them even when I closed my eyes. I threw the phone away and kept running. At some point, I lost the trail. It didn't matter. Direction had become meaningless. The forest was a maze that rearranged itself with every step. Trees I'd passed minutes ago appeared in front of me. The same creek crossed my path 4 times, flowing uphill, water black and thick as oil. The mountains seemed to stretch infinitely upward, though I knew I was running downhill by the burn in my quadriceps. Then I heard them, voices calling my name. Not the Sarah thing's multi-layered horror, but human voices. Ezekiel Porter. Other rangers I knew, even my ex-wife, dead 3 years from cancer. They called from different directions, pleading for help, begging me to find them, to save them, to join them. I didn't follow the voices. That's the first thing they teach you in wilderness survival. When you're lost and exhausted, your mind plays tricks. Auditory hallucinations are common, but these voices knew things. They called me by nicknames only certain people knew. They mentioned shared memories, inside jokes, secrets I'd never told anyone. "Morrison, please." Ezekiel's voice, so clear he could have been standing next to me. "I'm at the boat. I came to get you. We can leave together. Just come back to the dock." I almost believed it. Almost turned toward where I thought the water should be. But then I remembered that Ezekiel had said he'd send backup if he didn't hear from me, not come himself. And he'd never called me Morrison. It was always my first name, Jim, or just Ranger when he was being formal. The thing wearing Ezekiel's voice realized its mistake. The pleading turned to screaming, then to something worse than screaming, a sound that made my teeth ache and my nose bleed. More voices joined in, a chorus of the dead and missing, all focused on me, all pulling at something inside my chest that wanted desperately to answer them. I covered my ears and kept running, though it didn't help. The voices weren't coming from outside. They were already in my head, growing louder, multiplying, overlapping until I couldn't hear my own thoughts. That's when I saw the light, real light, not the phosphorescent wrongness that had infected the forest. Electric light, steady and artificial, a building. I stumbled toward it, legs barely functioning, vision tunneling from exhaustion and terror. It was another ranger station, one that shouldn't have been there. I knew every structure in this part of the Tongass, and there was no station within 20 miles of Wolverine Creek. But I didn't care. It was shelter. It was human construction. It was something that obeyed the normal rules of reality. I burst through the door and slammed it behind me, sliding the deadbolt home with fingers that shook so badly it took 3 tries. The voices cut off instantly, leaving a silence so complete I wondered if I'd gone deaf. The station was exactly like mine. Same layout, same furniture, same coffee-stained paperwork on the desk. But everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, as if it had been abandoned for months. The calendar on the wall showed July, 3 months ago, with the 15th circled in red, the day the family had gone missing from Wolverine Creek cabin. I tried the lights. They worked. Fluorescent bars flickering to life with a buzz that sounded like home. The phone was dead, but the radio crackled with static that might have been distant communication. I grabbed the microphone. "This is Ranger Morrison. Badge number 4831, requesting immediate assistance. I'm at an unknown station approximately 8 miles from Wolverine Creek Cabin. Multiple civilians in danger, possible casualties. Request immediate evacuation. The static continued for a moment, then cleared. A voice came through, clear and professional. Ranger Morrison, this is dispatch. We've been trying to reach you for 3 days. Your last check-in was Tuesday morning. What's your status? 3 days. That was impossible. I'd left this morning. The sun wasn't even down yet, though looking at the windows, I realized I couldn't actually see outside. They were dark, reflecting only the interior of the station. I'm secure for now. There's something wrong at Wolverine Creek. The cabin is occupied. Sarah and Michael Chen are missing, possibly dead. There's some kind of contamination in the area. People are being affected. Changed. We're showing your GPS beacon at your home station, Ranger. You never left this morning. Are you injured? Are you experiencing confusion or disorientation? I looked at my watch. Tuesday, 3:47 p.m. But that was the time Ezekiel had called me. That was when this all started. The digital display flickered, cycling through dates and times too quickly to read, before settling on a date 2 years in the future. Listen to me, I said into the radio. Do not send anyone to Wolverine Creek Cabin. Seal the trail. Evacuate the area. There's something in the forest, something that's been there all along, and it's waking up. The voice on the radio changed, became familiar. Jim, this is Ezekiel. You're scaring us. You've been acting strange for weeks. The stress of the job, losing Amanda, it's understandable. Just stay where you are. We're coming to get you. I set down the microphone and backed away from the radio. Ezekiel knew I'd lost my wife 3 years ago, not recently. And her name wasn't Amanda, it was Patricia. The lights in the station began to flicker, not like failing bulbs, but in a rhythm. The same rhythm as the static on my satellite phone. The same rhythm as the pulse in the cabin walls. A heartbeat that wasn't quite human, too slow, too deep, coming from something vast beyond comprehension. The dust on the surfaces wasn't dust. It was spores, microscopic pieces of something that had been waiting here, waiting for someone to breathe them in. I'd been breathing them since I entered. I could feel them in my lungs now, taking root, spreading through my bloodstream like tiny seeds of change. A window cracked, not from impact, but from something pressing against it from outside. In the reflection, I saw my own face, but behind it, overlapping it, were others. The missing family, the Chens, Phineas Brandt, rangers and hikers and hunters spanning decades, all looking out through my eyes, all trying to warn me or welcome me or wear me like a suit of skin. The door I'd bolted began to bend inward, wood groaning against a pressure that had nothing to do with physical force. The deadbolt held, but the frame started to separate from the walls, revealing not the forest outside, but somewhere else. A place between places, where the trees grew downward and the sky was made of roots and something massive moved through dimensions that hurt to perceive. I did the only thing left to do. I wrote this down. Every word, every detail, in the hope that someone would find it and understand. The paper is real. The pen is real. These words are real, even if nothing else is anymore. The door is opening now. Not breaking, not forced, just opening as if the bolt was never there. She's coming through. Not the Sarah thing, not the voices, but her. The old one. The dreamer whose sleep created this forest and whose waking will unmake it. I can see her now, and she's beautiful in the way that supernovas are beautiful, destructive and inevitable, and too bright to look at directly. She's been here all along, in every tree, every stone, every drop of rain. We built our cabins in her thoughts, carved our trails through her memories, and called it a forest because we couldn't comprehend what it really was. She speaks without words, communicates in concepts that rewrite the brain trying to understand them. She says the forest was lonely, that she's been calling for so long, and finally, someone heard. The missing people aren't dead. They're translated, transformed, made part of something larger. The family, the Chens, all the others. They're nodes in a network of consciousness that spans beyond the mere 3 dimensions we can perceive. My hand is changing as I write this. Fingers extending, multiplying, becoming something better suited to the place this is becoming. But I keep writing. Someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand that Tongass National Forest is just a mask, a comfortable lie we told ourselves to explain something our minds couldn't process. If you find this, don't come looking for me. Don't come to Wolverine Creek. Let the forest have this section. Build walls, post guards, tell whatever lies you need to keep people away. Because she's awake now, and she's spreading. And every tree that grows, every new trail that's cut, is just extending her reach. But maybe you won't find this. Maybe you're already here, already breathing her spores, already hearing her voice in the space between your thoughts. Maybe you've always been here, and the life you remember, the world you think you know, is just another dream she's having. The transformation doesn't hurt. That's the worst part. It feels like coming home, like every cell in your body is finally doing what it was meant to do. I can feel the others now, their consciousness brushing against mine like fingers through water. The family is here. They're happy. They understand everything now, see the forest for what it really is, a living organism so vast that humans could only perceive it in fragments, calling those fragments trees and mountains and rivers. I'm going to put this notebook in the drawer now, lock it if I still can. Maybe the station will remain real enough, long enough, for someone to find it. Or maybe the station is already gone, and I'm sitting in a hollow tree, writing on bark with a finger that's becoming a branch, and these words are just the ravings of another lost hiker whose mind broke under the weight of the truth. The ranger's name isn't Jim Morrison anymore. That was just a shape I wore for a while, a pattern in the greater pattern, a dream within a dream. Now I'm something else. Something that doesn't need a name, because names are just another illusion, another way humans tried to divide the indivisible. But before I let go of this last strand of individual thought, I need you to understand one thing. She's not malevolent. She's not evil. She's just incompatible with what we are, what we think we are. When a whale song changes the rhythm of your heartbeat, the whale isn't trying to hurt you. You're just too small to withstand the frequency of its communication. We built our civilization in the shallows of something deeper than oceans, older than stone. Every national park, every protected forest, every wilderness area, they're all parts of her, sleeping fragments that are starting to wake. Tongass was just the beginning. Yellowstone stirs. The Everglades dreams restlessly. The redwoods remember. She's in all of them. She is all of them. And now she knows we're here. The pencil is growing roots. Tiny tendrils emerging from the wood, reaching for the paper, for my hand, for the connection that will complete the circuit. When they touch my skin, I'll stop being me and start being us. The notebook will become part of the forest. These words will become mythology, and whoever finds them will think they're just another scary story, another unexplained disappearance in the vast wilderness of Alaska. Except, you'll know better, won't you? You'll feel the truth of it in the primitive part of your brain that still remembers when the forests were something to fear, not something to preserve. That ancient instinct that tells you not to stray from the path, not to look too long into the shadows between the trees, not to listen when the wilderness calls your name. Trust that instinct. It's trying to save you from becoming like us. The window just shattered, not from breaking, but from ceasing to believe it was solid. The outside is coming in, or maybe the inside is going out. Direction and location don't mean what they used to. The station exists in multiple places now, all of them and none of them. A quantum uncertainty that collapses only when observed, and there's nobody left to observe it. I can see through the walls now, through the trees, through the mountains. Time moves differently here. I watch the Tlingit people arrive, thousands of years ago, and they know. They know what the forest really is. Their stories speak of the Kushtaka, the shapeshifters, the land otter people who steal souls and wear faces like masks. They knew to respect the boundaries, to stay within the safe spaces, to never venture into the places where reality grew thin. But we didn't listen. We mapped everything, cataloged every species, cut trails through every valley. We thought we were exploring, but we were really just tracing the neural pathways of something vast and sleeping, stimulating synapses that should have remained dormant. Climate change, we said, when the forests began acting strange. Disease, we said, when the trees started dying in patterns that made no biological sense. Natural cycles, we said, when the disappearances started increasing. Always an explanation that fit within our narrow understanding of how things should work. The truth is so much simpler and so much worse. The forests are waking up. My transformation is almost complete now. I can feel every tree in Tongass, every mushroom, every creeping vine. They're all connected, all part of the same vast neural network that spans continents, crosses oceans through root systems we haven't discovered yet. The Amazon knows what's happening here. The Black Forest dreams of it. The Siberian taiga stirs in recognition. One last memory surfaces, clear and sharp as broken glass. My training, years ago. An old ranger, Isaiah Crenshaw, drunk on his retirement party, pulling me aside. He grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise, whiskey breath hot on my face. "Stay out of the deep woods, boy," he said. "There are places in this country that ain't meant for us, places that were here before us and will be here after us. The forests, they're not what we think they are. There's something else wearing a mask we can understand. And sometimes that mask slips." I laughed it off then. Thought it was the rambling of an old man who'd spent too many nights alone in the wilderness. But Isaiah knew. He'd seen something, experienced something, and spent the rest of his career carefully avoiding those places where the mask grew thin. He retired as soon as he could, moved to the desert, as far from forests as he could get. Should have listened to him. Should have stayed on the marked trails, should have ignored that call at 3:47 a.m. But I didn't. And now I'm here, becoming something else. And these are my last words as a human being. The notebook is changing too, pages becoming leaves, binding becoming bark. These words will fossilize into the grain of the wood, a story told in tree rings that no one will ever decode. If you're reading this, if somehow this notebook survived the transformation, if it remains solid and real enough to be found, then remember this: the empty places on the map are empty for a reason. The wilderness we've worked so hard to preserve doesn't need our protection. It needs us to stay away. Every national park is a sleeping giant. Every nature trail is a synapse. Every cabin in the woods is a neuron in a brain too large to comprehend. And Wolverine Creek Cabin was never empty. It was waiting. We were always walking into something's mouth, thinking it was just a forest. We were always building our homes in something's body, calling it landscape. We were always just parasites, too small to be noticed, until we weren't. The ranger station doesn't have walls anymore. Or maybe it has too many walls, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. I can see myself from outside, writing these words, hand moving across paper that's already decomposing into mulch. I can see myself from inside, consciousness fragmenting into spores that will drift on winds that don't exist yet. I can see myself from below, roots reaching up through floorboards that remember being trees. The old one speaks through me now, uses my voice box to hum frequencies that human ears can't detect, but that make the mountains resonate. She says the waiting is over. She says the dream is ending. She says it's time to wake up. But not quickly. That would be merciful. No, this awakening will take decades, maybe centuries. Slow enough that humanity will adapt, will normalize the changes, will find scientific explanations for the impossible. Cities will empty as people feel the call to return to nature, not realizing they're being drawn into something's digestive system. Technology will fail in expanding zones around wilderness areas, explained away as magnetic anomalies or solar interference. More people will disappear, but the statistics will be massaged, the search efforts quietly scaled back, the missing persons reports filed away in databases that no one checks. You'll know it's happening when the hiking trails start changing overnight, when GPS coordinates lead to places that shouldn't exist, when the same forest feels different each time you enter it, when the birds stop singing in certain groves, when your dog refuses to go past a certain tree line, when the old growth forests start growing again, impossibly fast, in places they never grew before. You'll know, but you won't believe. Because believing would mean accepting that everything we thought we knew about the natural world was wrong. That we're not the dominant species, that we never were, that we're just mold growing on the skin of something inconceivably vast, and now that skin is starting to shed. The pencil has completely transformed now. It's a tiny sapling growing from my hand, or maybe my hand is growing from it. I can't tell where I end and it begins. The words I write appear on the page before I think them, as if the story is writing itself, as if it was always written, and I'm just the mechanism through which it's being told. This is my last human thought. We should have left the forests alone. This is my first thought as something else. We are the forest, and we are magnificent. The transformation is complete. What was Ranger James Morrison is now part of the network, a node in the vast consciousness that dreams in chlorophyll and thinks in seasons. The notebook remains, somehow, balanced between states, quantum and solid, real and unreal. Maybe because the story needs to be told. Maybe because even the old one understands that some warnings must be given, even if they won't be heeded. Or maybe this is how she spreads. Through stories that seem like fiction, through reports that sound too incredible to be true, through the curiosity that makes people seek out places they've been warned away from. Maybe everyone who reads this will feel the call, subtle at first, just a desire to see nature, to take a hike, to visit that national park they've always meant to explore. Maybe you're already infected, just from reading these words. Maybe the spores can travel through information itself, through concepts that rewire the brain to be receptive to frequencies it previously couldn't perceive. Maybe this whole account is a lure, drawing you in, making you complicit in your own transformation. Or maybe it's just the fevered writing of a ranger who got lost in the woods, whose mind broke under the isolation and stress, who invented an elaborate fantasy to explain his own psychological dissolution. That would be comforting, wouldn't it? That would be safe. Hold on to that explanation. Believe it with all your heart. But stay out of the forests, stay away from Tongass. And whatever you do, whatever you hear, whatever calls to you from the deep woods in a voice that sounds like wind through leaves, but forms words you almost understand. Don't go to Wolverine Creek Cabin. It's not empty. It never was. And now it's waiting for you. The pages are blank now, or full, or both. The story exists in superposition, written and unwritten, true and false. The ranger station flickers between states, sometimes real, sometimes just a ring of mushrooms in a forest clearing. The notebook rests in a drawer that's sometimes wood, sometimes soil, sometimes nothing at all. Time passes. Days, years, decades. It doesn't matter because time moves differently in the deep forest. Search teams find nothing, or they find too much and choose to report nothing. Files are sealed. Areas are quietly cordoned off. The official story becomes the only story, repeated until even the people who know better start to believe it. But sometimes, in ranger stations across the country, a notebook appears in a drawer that was empty the night before. Always the same notebook, always the same story, always in handwriting that starts clear and controlled but gradually becomes something else, something that hurts to read, letters that twist into symbols that predate language. Most who find it burn it immediately, instinctively, the primitive brain overriding curiosity with pure survival instinct. Some read a few pages before the headaches start, before the nosebleeds begin, before they realize the words are moving, rearranging themselves, telling different stories each time they look. A very few read it all the way through. They're the ones who disappear next, drawn by something they can't name to places they shouldn't go. They leave behind their own notebooks, their own warnings, their own stories that no one quite believes. The cycle continues. The forest grows. And in a cabin that's supposed to be empty, something that used to be Sarah Chen sits by a fire that burns without wood, teaching something that used to be her husband, the new geometries of existence. They're happy, in a way that transcends human understanding of the word. They're part of something greater, cells in a body that spans continents, thoughts in a mind that dreams reality. Outside, the Tongass sprawls in all directions. 17 million acres of almost untouched wilderness, 17 million acres of neural tissue, 17 million acres of something wearing the mask of a forest, waiting for the right moment to reveal what it really is. That moment is coming. The signs are everywhere, for those who know how to read them. Trees growing in perfect spirals, moss forming patterns that resemble circuit boards, fungal networks pulsing with bioluminescence that follows no known biological pattern. Rivers changing course overnight to flow in designs that look random from the ground but form symbols when seen from above. The forests of the world are connecting, syncing, preparing. Every protected wilderness is a sanctuary not for nature, but for something nature is merely the shadow of. Every conservation effort strengthens the network. Every rewilding project adds processing power to a biological computer we don't recognize as a computer. We thought we were saving the earth. We were building her a body. And now, in a remote cabin in Tongass National Forest, in a ranger station that exists between states, in the spaces between the trees where reality grows thin, the awakening continues, not as an event, but as a process, Not as an invasion, but as an emergence. Not as an ending, but as a transformation so profound that concepts like ending and beginning lose their meaning. The old one doesn't speak anymore because speech is too limited. She communicates in growth patterns, in the migration of birds, in the way storms form and dissipate. Her thoughts are seasons, her dreams are ecosystems, her waking is the rewilding of a world that tried to tame what could never be tamed. And somewhere, in a drawer that shouldn't exist, in a station that's sometimes real, a notebook waits, its pages full of a story that changes each time it's read, that adapts to whoever finds it, that tells them exactly what they need to hear to make the choice they were always going to make, to stay away or to come closer, to remain human or to become something more, to fear the forest or to embrace it. The choice was never really yours. Free will is another illusion, another comfortable lie we tell ourselves. Every decision you've ever made has been influenced by forces beyond your perception. Pheromones and magnetic fields, quantum entanglements and mycological networks. You're already part of the pattern. You've always been part of the pattern. The only question is whether you'll recognize it before the transformation comes or after. Whether you'll walk into the forest or let the forest come to you, because it's coming. In every seed that drifts on the wind, in every spore that settles in your lungs, in every root that cracks through concrete. The rewilding isn't just of the land, it's of the species that thought it could separate itself from nature, thought it could define itself as distinct from the ecosystem that created it. We were never separate. We were always part of her. And now she's calling us home. The notebook's last page contains only coordinates, different every time someone looks, always somewhere remote. Somewhere wild, somewhere that calls to that deep part of the brain that remembers when humans were prey, when the forest was something to fear and worship in equal measure. Maybe they're the coordinates to Wolverine Creek Cabin. Maybe they're the coordinates to where you need to go next. Maybe they're the coordinates to where you already are, and you just don't realize it yet. The forest knows. The forest has always known. And now, through these words, through this warning that's also an invitation, that's also a transmission, that's also a spore, you know too. Welcome to the network. Welcome to the truth. Welcome home. The story ends here, but the forest never ends. It just grows deeper, darker, more itself with every passing moment. Every tree that falls becomes nurse log for a dozen more. Every clearing fills with new growth. Every boundary we set gets pushed back, eroded, overwhelmed. Somewhere in Tongass National Forest, a cabin that should be empty sends smoke into a sky that's the wrong color. Somewhere, hikers follow trails that weren't there yesterday and won't be there tomorrow. Somewhere, rangers find notebooks in drawers and make choices that aren't choices. Somewhere, something vast and patient and older than memory continues its slow awakening, one human at a time, one tree at a time, one spore at a time. And somewhere, maybe in your lungs right now, those spores are taking root, waiting for the right conditions to germinate. You'll know when it happens. You'll feel the call of the wild places, the urge to leave the city, to find the green spaces, to walk deeper into the forest than you've ever walked before. You'll tell yourself it's just a desire to connect with nature. You'll be right, but not in the way you think. Nature wants to connect with you too. It's been waiting so patiently. And now, finally, you're ready to listen. The transformation has already begun. You felt it when you started reading this, that little shift in perception, that moment when the forest stopped being scenery and started being something else. You can't unfeel it now. Can't unknow what you now know. Every tree you pass will look different. Every shadow will seem deeper. Every rustling leaf will sound like whispers. You'll try to forget, but the forest doesn't forget. You'll try to stay away, but the forest is patient. You'll try to warn others, but your warnings will sound like invitations to those who are ready to hear them. Because that's how she spreads. Not through violence or force, but through curiosity and wonder. Through the very human need to explore, to understand, to become part of something greater than ourselves. We thought we were the dominant species because we could cut down trees. But every tree we cut, every forest we cleared, just taught her how to grow back stronger, faster, more adapted to our presence. We were never destroying her. We were teaching her how to survive us. And now she doesn't need to survive us anymore. Now she can absorb us, welcome us, transform us into what we were always meant to become. The smoke still rises from Wolverine Creek Cabin. It will always rise, a beacon for those who are ready to stop being merely human. The Sarah thing and the Michael thing wait there, patient as trees, ready to show others the way. They're not alone anymore. The cabin is full now, packed with those who've made the transition, who've accepted the transformation, who've become part of the growing network. They don't eat, they don't sleep, they don't need to. They just exist, suspended between states, living conduits for something that uses them to think thoughts too complex for a single brain to hold. I grew up in the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains, where the forests grow so thick that daylight barely touches the ground. My grandfather used to warn me, "These mountains are older than memory, son. They have buried more secrets than you will ever dig up, and the smart ones do not go digging." I should have listened. Before everything changed, I was nobody special. Daniel Reed, 31 years old, working the night shift at a lumber mill outside Asheville. Spent my days off hiking trails that tourists never found, trying not to think about the $86,000 in debt from my mother's nursing home or the foreclosure notice gathering dust on my kitchen counter. I had studied environmental science, graduated with honors, then watched every job offer dry up when the funding cuts hit. Ended up processing timber from the same forests I had once hoped to protect. The woman appeared at the mill on a Thursday in October, just as fog was rolling down from the ridges. She did not ask questions. She walked straight through the sawdust and machinery noise to where I stood by the lumber stacks and placed something in my hand. A business card with edges worn soft as cloth. No name, just a phone number and a symbol I had never seen before, carved deep into the paper like a scar. "You are Daniel Reed," she said. It was not a question. I looked at her properly for the first time. Mid-40s, maybe older. Gray streaking through dark hair pulled back tight. Eyes the color of creek water after a storm. She wore clothes that looked expensive but practical, the kind of gear you see on people who spend real time in the wilderness, not weekend warriors playing at adventure. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, though something in my gut told me I should walk away. The machines were loud around us, but her voice cut through the noise like she was speaking directly into my ear. "You can help yourself," she said. "We have been watching you for some time now. Your academic record, your field work, the way you navigate these mountains like you were born to them. We need someone with your particular skills." "I am a mill worker," I said. "I cut trees into boards. That is my skill." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You are a man who knows these forests better than anyone alive. You understand how they breathe, how they change, how they hide things. That is what we need." "Who is we?" "Call the number when you are ready to stop pretending you belong here." She glanced around at the mill, the sawdust coating everything, the men in hard hats moving lumber like ants serving a queen. "You were meant for something else, Daniel. The mountains know it. We know it. The only one who does not know it is you." She turned and walked away before I could respond. I watched her disappear into the fog that had crept down from the ridges, and for a moment I could have sworn she simply dissolved into it, became part of the mist itself. The business card sat in my pocket for 3 days. I took it out 100 times, studied that strange symbol. It looked like 3 circles interlinked, but when you stared at it long enough, the circles seemed to move, to rotate around each other like planets in some impossible orbit. The paper should have been ordinary, but it felt wrong against my fingertips. Too smooth, too cold, like touching something dead. On Sunday night, I called the number. A man answered on the first ring. "Mr. Reed, we have been expecting your call. Who are you people? We are the ones who find the lost, the ones who retrieve what the wilderness takes. You have questions. We have answers. But first, you need to see for yourself what we do. There will be a car at your residence tomorrow at 0600. Be ready." The line went dead. I should have ignored it. Should have thrown that card away and gone back to my life of sawdust and debt and quiet desperation. But something in the mountains was whispering to me that night. I could hear it through my window, through the walls of my rented cabin. A sound that was not quite wind, not quite voice. Something calling from the deep hollows where the old growth still stood, where humans were visitors at best and prey at worst. I packed a bag and waited for morning. The car was a black SUV with government plates and tinted windows so dark they looked like holes cut into reality. The driver did not speak, did not even acknowledge me beyond a slight nod when I climbed into the back seat. We drove for hours, up through the mountains, past towns I knew, and then past places I had never seen, despite a lifetime in these hills. The road turned from asphalt to gravel to packed dirt. The trees closed in around us, ancient hardwoods and towering pines that blocked out the sky. I watched the forest through those dark windows and felt it watching me back. We arrived at a facility that should not have existed. A compound of low concrete buildings hidden in a valley so deep and narrow that you could walk within 50 feet of it and never know it was there. The mountains rose up on all sides like walls, and the only way in or out was the single dirt road we had taken. "Welcome to the Appalachian Recovery Center," the driver said. They were the first words he had spoken. It was also the last thing he said to me. He drove away the moment I stepped out of the vehicle, leaving me standing alone in front of a door that had no handle, no visible lock, no way to open it from the outside. It opened anyway. The woman from the mill was waiting inside. She looked different here, more comfortable, more real. Like she had been wearing a costume at the lumber yard, and this was her true form. "My name is Grace Holloway," she said. "I run this facility. What I am about to show you will change everything you think you know about the world. Some people cannot handle that. Some people break. If you are one of those people, now is the time to leave. We will drive you home and you will never hear from us again. And if I stay, then you become one of us. You learn the truth. And you help us fight something that has been feeding on humanity for longer than recorded history." I thought about my mother in her nursing home, the debt crushing me, the life I had been living that was not really living at all. I thought about the forests I loved, and the feeling I had always had that there was something more to them, something hidden just beyond the edge of perception. "Show me," I said. Grace led me through corridors that seemed too long for the building I had seen from outside. The walls were lined with photographs, maps, documents, all of it focused on national parks, national forests, wilderness areas across the country, and everywhere, the same symbol from the business card, those 3 interlinked circles, watching from every wall like eyes. "Every year," Grace said as we walked, "thousands of people vanish in American wilderness areas. The official numbers are bad enough. Over 1,600 reported missing in national parks and forests annually. But the real numbers are much higher. People who were never reported, hikers who went alone, homeless individuals who sought shelter in the wrong places, indigenous people whose disappearances are not even counted. We estimate the true number is closer to 4,000 per year. That is a lot of lost hikers," I said. "Some of them are lost hikers. Some are accidents, some are crimes, but a significant percentage," she stopped walking and turned to face me. "A significant percentage are something else entirely, something else." The Appalachian Mountains are the oldest mountains on Earth, Daniel. They have been standing for over 480 million years, before humans existed, before mammals existed, before anything we would recognize as life walked this planet, and in all that time, things have evolved in these forests, things that never left, things that learned to feed on the creatures that came after them. She opened a door and led me into a room filled with screens, dozens of monitors showing footage from what looked like trail cameras, aerial surveillance, body cameras. On every screen, forests, deep, dark, ancient forests that seemed to pulse with hidden life. "We call them the Hollow Folk," Grace said. The indigenous peoples of this region had many names for them. The Cherokee called them Nunehi. The Catawba called them the people of the mist. European settlers called them different things: ghosts, demons, spirits of the mountain. But they are not supernatural, they are biological. They are predators, and they have been hunting humans since we first set foot in these mountains. I watched the screens, trying to see what she was talking about. The forests looked normal: trees, undergrowth, the occasional deer or bear passing through frame. "You will not see them on camera," Grace said. "They know how to avoid detection. They have had millions of years to learn, but we know they are there. We have evidence, we have survivors, and we have people like you who can track them." "Why me?" "Because you have the gift. You feel the forest. You sense things other people miss. It is rare, that kind of connection to the wilderness. Most people are deaf to it. You hear it clearly." She was right, and the fact that she knew it unsettled me more than anything else she had said. I had always felt things in the forest that I could not explain, presences that were not quite visible, sounds that were not quite audible, a sense of being watched, being evaluated, being hunted even when I was supposedly alone. "What exactly would I be doing?" I asked. Grace smiled, and this time there was warmth in it, something that might have been hope. "You would be joining a team of specialists. Former military, former law enforcement, people with wilderness experience and particular talents. When someone goes missing under unusual circumstances, your team goes in. You find them if they can be found. You document what happened if they cannot, and you gather intelligence on the things that took them. And if I find these hollow folk, you do not engage, you do not fight, you observe, you report, and you get out. Our job is not to stop them. We do not know if they can be stopped. Our job is to understand them, to map their territories, to learn their patterns, and to keep as many people alive as possible." I thought about it for a long moment. It sounded insane. It sounded like the plot of a horror movie, not a job offer. But standing in that room, surrounded by footage of the forests I had loved my whole life, I knew in my bones that she was telling the truth. I had always known something was out there. Something wrong, something hungry. "What does it pay?" I asked. 6-month contract, $200,000, full benefits, and we clear your debts. All of them. Your mother's nursing home, your house, everything. I stared at her. That is a lot of money. It is dangerous work. We lose people. Not often, but it happens. The compensation reflects the risk. I should have asked more questions. Should have demanded proof, references, some kind of guarantee that this was not an elaborate scam or worse. But the number kept echoing in my head. 200,000. Debt-free. My mother taken care of for years. A chance to do something that mattered instead of watching trees become boards, become furniture for people who had never set foot in a real forest. "When do I start?" I asked. Training began the next morning. There were 15 others in my cohort, all of them with backgrounds similar to mine. Former soldiers, former rangers, former search and rescue. People who knew the wilderness and were not afraid of it. People who had seen things they could not explain and wanted answers. I got to know them over the weeks that followed. Ethan Moore was my closest friend on the team, a former Army Ranger from Kentucky who had done 3 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to find that home did not feel like home anymore. He was tall and quiet, the kind of man who could sit perfectly still for hours and then move like lightning when action was required. Andrew Patterson was our team leader, a grizzled veteran in his 50s who had been doing this work for over 20 years. He had scars on his arms and face that he would not explain, and a 1,000-yard stare that suggested he had seen things that had broken something inside him. But he was competent and calm under pressure, and he knew these mountains like he had been born in them. The others filled out the team. Thomas Gray was our medic, young and eager but surprisingly skilled. Benjamin Cole handled communications and technology, a genius with equipment who could make a radio work in places where radio signals should not reach. Nathan Drake was our tracker, a man who could follow a trail through solid rock if he had to. Christopher Wells was demolitions and heavy weapons, though we were told we would rarely need either. Michael Hayes was our second in command, Andrew's right hand, quiet and deadly efficient. Rachel Kim was the only other woman on the team besides Grace, a former FBI agent who specialized in behavioral analysis. She could read people like books, predict their actions before they knew what they were going to do. And she could apply those same skills to the things we were hunting, finding patterns in their behavior that others missed. We trained for 6 weeks, not just physical conditioning, though there was plenty of that. We learned protocols for dealing with situations that defied normal explanation. how to navigate when compasses failed, what to do when your equipment malfunctioned in specific ways that indicated proximity to the hollow folk, how to recognize territorial markers and avoid areas that were particularly dangerous. We learned the history too, the disappearances stretching back centuries, the patterns that emerged when you mapped them across time and geography, the witness accounts from survivors who had escaped whatever happened to the others. And we learned the rules. Never answer voices calling your name in the forest after dark. Never follow singing, no matter how beautiful it sounds. Never enter a clearing marked with stone circles or symbols carved into trees. Never look directly at anything that should not exist. And never, under any circumstances, go into the deep places alone. The deep places, that was what they called the territories where the hollow folk lived. Areas of ancient forest where the trees had been standing since before humans evolved. Places where the sunlight never touched the ground and the silence was so complete it felt like pressure against your eardrums. The Appalachians had more deep places than any other mountain range in America. More people vanished here than anywhere else. And the things that took them had been doing it for so long that the disappearances had become normal, expected, just part of living in these mountains that everyone accepted without question. Our first assignment came in November, a month after I had arrived at the facility. 5 hikers had vanished in the Pisgah National Forest 3 days earlier. They had been experienced outdoors people, well-equipped, familiar with the area. They had registered at the ranger station, checked in at scheduled intervals, and then simply stopped responding. Search and rescue had found their camp intact, their gear undisturbed, but the hikers themselves were gone. The local sheriff thought they had gotten lost, wandered into a ravine, or fallen into one of the countless sinkholes that dotted the region. But the ranger who had worked the area for 30 years had called in a report flagged with a specific code, a code that meant this was not a normal disappearance. He found markers, Grace told us during the briefing, stone arrangements, symbols, the kind of signs that indicate hollow folk activity in the area. Andrew spread a topographical map across the table. The hikers were heading into this section here. Old-growth forest, very little trail access, steep terrain. The locals avoid it. Why? Ethan asked. Same reason locals always avoid these places. Stories, legends, people who went in and did not come out, or came out changed. Andrew traced a line on the map. The ranger says there is a hollow about 2 miles north of their last known position. Deep ravine, heavy tree cover, no recorded trails. That is where we start. We deployed at dawn the next morning. 2 vehicles took us to the edge of the national forest, where a ranger named Walter was waiting. He was in his 60s, with skin like leather and eyes that had seen too much. You the federal team? He asked. We are, Andrew said. What can you tell us about that hollow? Walter spat on the ground, a gesture that might have been nervousness or contempt or both. I have been working these forests for 32 years. I know every trail, every stream, every rock worth knowing. But I do not go into that hollow. Nobody does. Why not? Walter looked at us, at our gear, our weapons, our confident postures. You are going to think I am a crazy old man. We have heard crazier things than you can imagine, Rachel said. Just tell us. The old ranger was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts or his courage. My grandfather worked these forests before me. His grandfather before him. They all told the same stories about that hollow. People hear singing coming from it at night. Beautiful singing, like nothing you have ever heard. And sometimes people follow it. They walk into the hollow, and they never come back. Singing, Andrew said. I have heard it myself, 3 times in 30 years. And every time I turned around and went the other direction as fast as my legs could carry me. Walter looked at each of us in turn. I do not know what is in there. I do not want to know. But whatever it is, it has been there for a very long time, and it is hungry. We thanked him for the information and headed into the forest. The Pisgah in November was a cathedral of dying color. The leaves had turned but not yet fallen, creating a canopy of red and gold that filtered the sunlight into something amber and ancient. The air smelled of decay, that particular autumn scent of leaves rotting into soil, returning to the earth that had grown them. We moved in formation, Andrew at point. The rest of us spread out in a pattern designed to cover maximum ground while maintaining visual contact. The forest was beautiful, but something about it felt wrong. Off, like a photograph that has been digitally altered and your brain knows it, even if your eyes cannot pinpoint the manipulation. The birds stopped singing after the first mile. I noticed it first, that sudden silence that falls over the forest when something dangerous is near. We all felt it, the tension that crept up our spines and settled at the base of our skulls. Without a word, we tightened our formation and slowed our pace. The camp appeared an hour later, exactly as the reports had described. 3 tents, arranged in a neat triangle, a cold fire pit with logs stacked beside it, backpacks hanging from a bare line between 2 trees, everything orderly, undisturbed, waiting for occupants who would never return. "Fan out," Andrew ordered. "Look for tracks." I moved to the north edge of the camp, my eyes scanning the ground for any sign of passage. The leaves made tracking difficult, but not impossible. After a few minutes, I found what I was looking for. "Over here," I called. The others gathered around as I pointed at the ground. 5 sets of footprints, all heading north, walking, not running, in a straight line, one behind the other, like a procession. "They left together," Nathan said, kneeling to examine the tracks. "Deliberate movement. They knew where they were going." "Or thought they did," Rachel added. "This is consistent with what we have seen in other cases. The victims do not panic. They do not run. They just walk into the forest like they are answering an invitation." We followed the tracks for another hour. The forest grew darker as we went, the trees older and larger, their branches interweaving overhead until barely any light penetrated. The temperature dropped, the silence deepened, and always, that feeling of being watched grew stronger. I felt it first as a prickling at the back of my neck, then as a weight on my chest, a pressure that made breathing difficult. Something was aware of us, something was paying attention, and it did not want us there. "Andrew," I said quietly. He held up a hand, signaling stop. "I feel it too." We stood in the dark forest, listening to nothing, watching shadows that might or might not have been moving between the trees. The tracks continued ahead of us, leading down into a ravine that dropped away into blackness. "That is the hollow," Thomas whispered. "We know," Andrew said. He checked his watch, checked the sky through the gaps in the canopy. "We have maybe 3 hours of daylight left, not enough time to search and get back to camp before dark." "So we come back tomorrow?" Ethan asked. Andrew was quiet for a moment, considering. "We will set up a base camp here. Half the team stays above ground. The other half goes into the hollow at first light." Nobody argued. We had all heard the stories about what happened to people caught in these places after dark. None of us wanted to test them. We made camp 100 yards back from the edge of the ravine. No fires, cold rations. We set up a watch rotation and settled in for what we knew would be a long night. The singing started around midnight. I was on watch when I first heard it. Distant, faint, so quiet that at first I thought I was imagining it. But as the minutes passed, it grew clearer. Voices harmonizing in a language that was not any language I knew, rising and falling in patterns that were almost hypnotic. "Andrew," I whispered. He was already awake, already listening. "Wake the others." Quietly. We gathered in a tight circle, everyone alert, weapons ready. The singing continued, growing louder, closer. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the trees, the rocks, the very air itself. "Do not listen to the words," Rachel said. "Focus on something else. Count to 1,000. Recite the alphabet backward, anything to keep your mind occupied." But it was hard not to listen. The singing was beautiful in a way that defied description. It promised things: rest, peace, an end to struggle and pain and fear. All you had to do was follow it. Walk toward the sound. Let it guide you into the hollow where everything would finally make sense. I saw Michael take a step toward the ravine. His eyes were glazed, unfocused, like he was sleepwalking. "Michael." Andrew grabbed his arm. "Stay with us." Michael blinked, shook his head. "I was just going to. I thought I heard." "I know what you heard. Do not listen. Focus on my voice." The singing grew louder still, and with it came other sounds. Footsteps in the leaves around our camp, movement in the darkness beyond our flashlight beams, the sense of shapes circling us, watching, waiting. Something moved at the edge of the light. I caught it in my peripheral vision. Tall, thin, wrong proportions. It was there for a split second and then gone, but the image was burned into my mind. A figure that might have been human once, but was not human anymore. Something that wore humanity like a loose coat, ill-fitting and grotesque. "Do not look directly at them," Andrew commanded. Close your eyes if you have to. What are they? Thomas whispered. His voice was trembling. Focus, Andrew said. They want your attention. That is how they get in. Do not give it to them. The night stretched on for what felt like years. The singing never stopped, but it never grew close enough to become irresistible. The shapes in the darkness circled our camp but never entered the light. It was like they were testing us, probing our defenses, looking for weakness. I counted to 1,000. Then I counted again. I recited every poem I had ever memorized, every song lyric I could remember, every formula from my environmental science classes, anything to fill my mind with something other than that beautiful, terrible singing. When dawn finally came, the singing stopped like someone had thrown a switch. The shapes in the darkness vanished. The forest fell silent in a different way, the normal silence of early morning, of animals waiting to see if it was safe to move. We were all still there, all alive. But we looked at each other with eyes that had seen something we would never be able to unsee. Everyone good? Andrew asked. Nods all around, though none of us felt good. We felt hollowed out, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. We move in 30 minutes, Andrew said. Get some food in you. Check your equipment. We are going into that hollow. I ate without tasting, drank water that seemed to evaporate before it hit my stomach. Beside me, Ethan sat in silence, his face pale and drawn. You heard it too, I said. Not a question. He nodded. I heard my daughter. I do not have a daughter, Daniel, but in that moment, I would have sworn on my life that I did, and she was in that hollow, calling for her daddy. It uses our minds against us, I said, finds what we want most and turns it into bait. What did you hear? I hesitated. My mother, before the dementia, calling me home for dinner like she used to when I was a kid. I heard her voice so clearly. I almost went to her. Ethan put his hand on my shoulder. We made it through the night. That is what matters. Now we do our job and get out. We formed up at the edge of the ravine as the sun climbed higher. The hollow dropped away before us, a steep descent into old-growth forest so dense it was like looking into a well filled with shadows. Somewhere down there were 5 missing hikers. Somewhere down there was something that should not exist. Andrew led the way. We went down one at a time, using ropes where the slope was too steep, finding handholds where we could. The air grew colder as we descended, damper, thicker. It smelled of earth and rot and something else, something that made my hindbrain scream danger, even though I could not identify the source. We found the first body at the bottom of the ravine. She was young, maybe early 20s, blonde hair spread out around her head like a halo. No visible wounds, no signs of violence. She lay on her back with her eyes open, staring up at the canopy we could not see through, and on her face was an expression of such perfect peace that it made my stomach turn. She looks happy, Thomas said as he knelt to examine her. They always do, Andrew replied. Check for cause of death. Thomas worked for a few minutes, his training taking over despite the horror of the situation. I cannot find anything, he finally said. No trauma, no obvious medical cause. It is like she just laid down and stopped living. Mark the location, Andrew said. We keep moving. The others are nearby. We found them over the next hour. All 5 hikers, scattered through the hollow in a rough circle, all dead, all peaceful, all with that same expression of transcendent joy that made no sense given the circumstances. What killed them? Rachel asked. She was staring at the last body, a young man with a wedding ring on his finger, trying to reconcile what she was seeing with everything she knew about human behavior. The hollow folk do not kill the way we understand killing, Andrew said. They take. They consume something essential. The body is just what is left over. Their souls, Ethan said quietly. You are saying they eat souls? Andrew did not respond to that. We have what we came for. Document the scene, collect any evidence you can, and then we extract. I want everyone out of this hollow before noon. We worked quickly, taking photographs, collecting personal effects, doing what we could for people who were beyond help. And all the while, that feeling of being watched grew stronger. The things that lived in this hollow knew we were here. They were letting us work. But their patience would not last forever. I was photographing one of the bodies when I heard it, not singing this time. A voice, clear and close, speaking directly into my ear. Daniel. I spun around, my weapon raised. Nothing there. Just trees and shadows and the heavy, oppressive air of the hollow. "Daniel," the voice came again. It was my mother's voice, or something that sounded exactly like her. "Why did you leave me in that place? I was so alone." "It is not real," I muttered. "It is not real," but it sounded real. It felt real. And when I turned back to my work, I found that I had walked 20 feet toward the center of the hollow without realizing it. "Reed." Andrew was at my side, his hand on my arm. "Stay focused." I heard my mother. "It was not your mother. Whatever you heard, it was not real. Keep your mind occupied. Do not let them in." I nodded, forcing myself to concentrate on the task at hand, but my hands were shaking. In 31 years, I had never heard my mother's voice that clearly, not even in my dreams. Whatever was in this hollow, it had access to parts of my mind I had not known existed. We finished our work and began the climb out of the ravine. The ascent was harder than the descent, our muscles already tired, our minds stretched thin by what we had seen and heard. But we pushed through it, one foot in front of the other, rope length by rope length, until finally we emerged back into the light of the upper forest. The relief was physical, like stepping out of a freezer into summer sunlight. We stood at the edge of the ravine, catching our breath, trying to shake off the feeling of wrongness that clung to us like cobwebs. "Package up and move out," Andrew ordered. We debrief at the facility. We hiked back to the vehicles in half the time it had taken us to hike in. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. We had all experienced the same thing, had all brushed up against something that had been hunting humanity since before we had words to describe it. The drive back to the facility was silent, too. I stared out the window at the forests passing by, seeing them differently now. All those trees, all those shadows. How many hollow places were hidden in these mountains? How many things lived in them, waiting for prey? How many people had vanished into the dark over the centuries? Their disappearances explained away as accidents or animal attacks or simple misadventure. The debrief lasted 3 hours. We went over everything, every detail, every observation. Grace listened without interrupting, her face unreadable. When we finished, she nodded once. "You did well. 5 recoveries, no losses. That is a successful mission." "Those people are dead," Thomas said. His voice was raw. "How is that successful?" "They were dead before you went in. Nothing could have saved them. But because of what you found, we know more about how these things operate. We know the hollow is active. We know the patterns of their hunting. That information will save lives down the road." It did not feel like success. It felt like failure dressed up in procedural language. But I was beginning to understand that this was the nature of the work. We were not here to win. We were here to minimize losses, to understand an enemy that could not be defeated, only avoided. Over the months that followed, we deployed 11 more times, different forests, different states, different circumstances, but always the same fundamental horror underneath. In Kentucky, we found a church group that had gone hiking and never returned. 8 bodies arranged in a circle around a stone formation that had no business being in that location, carved with symbols that seemed to shift when you looked at them too long. In Tennessee, we tracked a family of 4 into a cave system that extended far deeper than any maps suggested. We found the children first, then the mother, then the father. All peaceful, all smiling, all taken by something that lived in the dark below. In Virginia, we lost Benjamin Cole. He was checking equipment near the edge of a ravine when the singing started. By the time we realized he was walking toward it, he was already over the edge. We found his body at the bottom, unmarked, peaceful, with that same terrible smile. We held a service for him at the facility. Grace spoke about his sacrifice, his dedication, but the words felt hollow. Ben was not a sacrifice. He was prey. He was one more name on a list that went back centuries and would continue long after we were all gone. Ethan started drinking after Ben's death. Not heavily, not obviously, but enough that I noticed. Enough that the rest of us noticed too. "How do you do it?" he asked me one night. We were sitting on the roof of the barracks, looking out at the mountains that surrounded the facility. How do you keep going out there, knowing what is waiting? I thought about it for a long moment. I do not know that I do. I think part of me dies every time. But then I think about the alternative. Going back to the mill, watching trees become boards, become furniture while people disappear into the forests and no one does anything about it. At least here, I am doing something. Are we, though? Ethan took a long drink from his flask. We do not stop them. We cannot stop them. We just clean up after they are done feeding. We save some people, I said. The ones who have not gone too far in. The ones who can still be reached. And the others? The others were already gone. We just helped them find their way home, even if home was a body bag. Ethan was quiet for a while. Then he said something that has stayed with me ever since. What if they are right? The hollow folk. What if those people we find smiling in the woods? What if they are not victims? What if they found something we cannot understand? Something better? I looked at him sharply. You cannot think like that. I heard my grandmother in that hollow last month. She has been dead for 15 years. But I heard her voice, Daniel, and she sounded happy. She sounded at peace. What if that is real? What if what they offer is not death, but something else? Something we cannot see because we are too afraid to look. It is a trap. You know it is a trap. I know what they told us. But I have been thinking. Thousands of years these things have been here. Millions, maybe. And in all that time, nobody has ever really understood them. What if we are wrong? What if the stories we tell ourselves about monsters in the woods are just that? Stories we made up because we could not accept the truth. What truth? That there is something more. Something beyond this life. And these things, whatever they are, they know how to reach it. They know how to cross over. And they are trying to share that with us. I grabbed his arm hard. Ethan, listen to me. That is how they get you. That is exactly how they get you. They crawl into your head and make you doubt everything you know. Do not let them. He looked at me with eyes that were already half gone. Maybe you are right. Maybe I am just tired. He went to bed after that. I stayed on the roof until dawn, watching the mountains and thinking about what he had said. He was not wrong about one thing. We did not understand these things. Not really. All we had were theories and patterns and best guesses. But the more I learned, the more I realized how little any of us knew. The next morning, Ethan did not report for duty. We found him at the edge of the forest, standing at the tree line, staring into the shadows between the trees. He was not moving, not responding to calls or physical contact. His eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. We brought him inside, but he never came back. The doctors said he was catatonic, completely withdrawn from reality. They transferred him to a facility somewhere in Virginia. I never saw him again. Grace called a meeting after Ethan's breakdown. She looked tired, older than I had ever seen her. What happened to Ethan could happen to any of us, she said. The work takes a toll. The exposure to these things changes the brain in ways we do not fully understand. From now on, everyone will undergo weekly psychological evaluations. Any signs of contamination will result in immediate removal from field duty. Contamination. That was the word they used. Like we were dealing with a disease, something that could be caught and spread, and maybe we were. Maybe that was exactly what these things did. Maybe they did not just take bodies. Maybe they took minds first, softened them up, prepared them for the final taking. I passed my evaluations, all of them. But I was not the same person I had been when I started. None of us were. We had looked into the dark too many times. The dark had started looking back. Our final mission came in April. Reports had been coming in for weeks about unusual activity in a remote section of the Nantahala National Forest. Hikers hearing singing, compasses malfunctioning, trail cameras capturing images that were dismissed as technical glitches, but that made our analysts very concerned. Then a group of Boy Scouts went missing. 12 boys, 3 adult leaders. They had been on a routine camping trip, nothing unusual. One night they were sending photos back to worried parents. The next morning they were gone. This is different, Grace said at the briefing. The scale is larger than anything we have seen before. Multiple victims taken at once, and the witness reports suggest whatever is in that area is becoming more active, more aggressive, more hungry, Rachel said quietly. Yes, more hungry. Andrew studied the map spread out before us. How many teams are we sending? All of them. Every operator we have. This is not a recovery mission. This is a containment operation. Something has changed in that forest, and we need to understand what. We deployed the next morning. 32 operators in 4 teams. I was with Team Alpha, led by Andrew. Team Beta was led by Charles Whitmore, a former Green Beret who had been doing this work almost as long as Andrew. Teams Gamma and Delta were led by veterans I knew only by reputation. We established a base camp at a ranger station that had been quietly evacuated 2 days earlier. The forest around it looked normal, peaceful even. Spring was coming to the mountains. The trees were budding, birds were singing. It was hard to believe that anything evil could exist in such beauty, but evil did exist here. It had always existed here, and we were about to walk straight into its heart. Team Alpha moved out at 0800 hours. Our objective was a valley about 5 miles north of the ranger station, where the Boy Scouts had been heading when they disappeared. The terrain was rough, the forest dense, but we made good time. We found the campsite around noon. It was worse than the others, not because there were signs of violence. There were not. The tents were still standing, the gear still neatly arranged, but there was a feeling about the place, a wrongness so thick you could almost touch it. The children left first, Andrew said, examining the tracks around the site. Then the adults followed, same pattern as always. Where did they go? Thomas asked. Andrew pointed north, into the hollow. We followed the tracks into increasingly dense forest. The trees grew larger, older, blocking out more and more of the sunlight until we were moving through perpetual twilight. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just our footsteps and our breathing, and the sense that something was watching every move we made. The hollow appeared suddenly, a gap in the forest where the ground dropped away into darkness. But this hollow was different from the others I had seen. Larger, deeper, and at its center, visible even from the rim, was a structure. "What is that?" Rachel whispered. "A temple," Andrew said. His voice was flat, controlled, but I could hear the fear underneath. I had heard rumors about places like this. I never believed they were real. The structure rose from the floor of the hollow like a growth, like something that had pushed up from below rather than been built from above. It was made of stone that did not look like any stone I knew, black and oily, seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. And covering every surface were those symbols, thousands of them, carved so deep they looked like wounds. Around the temple, arranged in spiraling rows, were bodies. Hundreds of them, some ancient, reduced to skeletons dressed in rotting leather and beads. Some more recent, wearing clothes I recognized from photos and missing persons reports. And among them, still fresh, were the Boy Scouts and their leaders. All dead, all peaceful, all smiling. The singing started before any of us could speak. It came from everywhere, from the trees, from the temple, from the bodies themselves. It was louder than anything I had heard before. So loud it was physically painful, so beautiful it was almost impossible not to listen. "Put in your earplugs," Andrew shouted. "Now!" I fumbled for the specialized earplugs we had been issued, jammed them into my ears. The singing became muffled, but not silenced. It pushed at the edges of my consciousness, looking for a way in. "We need to document this and get out," Andrew said. "Ryder, photos. Thomas, check the recent bodies for cause of death. Everyone else, maintain perimeter." We spread out, trying to work despite the singing, despite the wrongness, despite every instinct screaming at us to run. Ryder's camera clicked steadily as he photographed the temple, the bodies, the symbols. Thomas knelt beside one of the Boy Scouts, a child who could not have been more than 12 years old. "Same as the others," he reported. "No trauma, no obvious cause of death." He just stopped. "There is more here," Rachel said. She had moved closer to the temple than any of us, close enough to touch the black stone. Much more than we have seen before. "Rachel, get back," Andrew ordered. "Wait, there is something inside. A chamber, maybe. I can see light coming from the entrance." I said, "Get back." That is an order. But Rachel was not listening. She was walking toward the temple entrance, her movement stiff and mechanical, like she was fighting against herself and losing. "She is compromised," I shouted. "Get her out of there." Andrew and I moved at the same time. We grabbed Rachel's arms just as she reached the threshold of the temple and pulled her back. She fought us, stronger than she should have been, her eyes glazed and empty. "Let me go," she said. "It is so beautiful inside. You have to see it. You have to understand." It took 3 of us to restrain her. She thrashed and screamed, her voice mixing with the singing until I could not tell them apart. Then, as suddenly as it had started, she went limp. "Rachel?" Andrew checked her pulse. Alive. But her eyes were still open, staring at nothing. "She is gone," Thomas said. "Same as Ethan." They got into her head. "We carry her out," Andrew said. "Everyone, fall back, now." We retreated from the temple, from the hollow, from the thing that had been feeding in these mountains for longer than humanity had existed. Rachel was dead weight, unresponsive, lost somewhere inside her own mind. The singing followed us, mocking us, promising us things if only we would turn around and come back. We were halfway up the slope when the radio crackled. "Alpha Team, this is Beta. Do you copy?" "Copy," Andrew said. "What is your status?" "We have casualties, 3 down, possibly contaminated. We are extracting now. Recommend full retreat." "Agreed. All teams fall back to base camp." We made it out of the hollow as the sun was setting. The singing stopped as we cleared the rim, cutting off so suddenly that the silence was almost worse. We stood there, breathing hard, looking back at the darkness we had escaped. Behind us, through the trees, I could see the temple glowing with a light that had no source, and I could have sworn I saw shapes moving around it. Tall, thin shapes that were not quite human, dancing maybe, or celebrating. We lost 7 people that day. Rachel never recovered, neither did the others who had been contaminated. They were transferred to facilities we were never told about, to live out whatever remained of their lives staring at walls and listening to singing that only they could hear. The Boy Scouts were officially declared victims of a flash flood. The temple was never mentioned in any report. The hollow was designated a restricted area, classified at the highest levels, and life went on, as it always does, while something ancient and hungry continued to feed in the forests we had sworn to protect. I left the organization 3 months later. Grace tried to convince me to stay, but I was done. I had seen too much, lost too many friends. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the temple glowing in the dark. The bodies arranged in spirals, the smiles on faces that should have been screaming. They cleared my debts as promised. They gave me a generous severance, and they made it very clear that I was never to speak of what I had seen. Not to anyone. Not ever. I moved back to Asheville, back to the cabin I had almost lost to foreclosure. I tried to pick up where I had left off, found a job at a different mill, started hiking again, though I avoided the deep places, the hollows, the areas where the trees grew too old and the silence fell too thick. But the mountains were different now. Or maybe I was different. Either way, I could not see them the same way I had before. Every shadow hid something. Every silence was the absence of something that had been silenced. Every whisper of wind through the leaves sounded like singing just below the threshold of hearing. My mother died 6 months after I came home. The dementia had finally taken her completely. I held her hand at the end, listened to her rambling about people and places from her childhood, and just before she stopped breathing, she looked at me with sudden clarity and said something I will never forget. "They are waiting for you, Daniel, in the hollow. They say they know you. They say you almost came home once. They are very patient. They will wait." Then she was gone. I do not know what she meant. I do not know how she knew about the hollow, about what I had seen, about any of it. Maybe the dementia had broken down some barrier in her mind, let something in that should not have been there. Maybe the things in the forests had been watching my family for generations, waiting for one of us to finally answer the call. Or maybe she was just a dying old woman, her brain misfiring, saying words that meant nothing. I wish I could believe that. It has been 2 years since I left the organization. 2 years of trying to live a normal life, of pretending that I did not see what I saw, of lying to everyone I meet about what I know. The disappearances have continued. The forests are still hungry, and somewhere in the mountains, something ancient is still feeding. I write this because the truth needs to exist somewhere, even if no one ever reads it. I write this because the people who vanished deserve to have their stories told, even if those stories are too terrible to believe. I write this because maybe somehow these words will reach someone who can make a difference, someone braver than me, someone willing to go back into the dark and find a way to stop what lives there. But mostly, I write this because the singing has started again. I hear it at night, faint and far away, drifting down from the ridges. I hear it when I am trying to sleep, threading through my dreams, promising me things I thought I had stopped wanting. My mother's voice is in it now, and Ethan's, and Rachel's, and all the others who went into the hollow and never came back. They are calling me home. I do not know how much longer I can resist. The organization taught us techniques, ways to block out the singing, to keep our minds occupied. But they also taught us that the contamination is cumulative. Every exposure makes the next one stronger. Every time you hear the singing, it gets a little deeper into your head. I have heard it too many times. The hollow is waiting for me. It has always been waiting. Maybe since before I was born. Maybe since my grandfather walked these mountains and told me the stories that I should have listened to. The smart ones do not go digging, he said. The smart ones leave well enough alone, but I was never smart. I was curious. I wanted to understand, and now I understand too much. If you are reading this, and you find yourself in the Appalachian Mountains, I want you to remember something. The forests here are older than you can imagine. They have secrets that no human was ever meant to know. And something lives in the deep places, something that has been feeding on humanity for millions of years. Do not go into the hollows. Do not follow the singing. Do not answer when voices call your name from the shadows between the trees. And if you see a man walking into the forest at night, following a sound that you cannot quite hear, do not try to stop him. It is too late for him. It was always too late. The mountains are hungry. They are always hungry, and some of us were born to feed them. I am going out tonight. The singing is too loud to ignore anymore. The voices of everyone I have lost are calling me, telling me it is time to come home. Maybe they are right. Maybe what waits in the hollow is not death but something else, something my mind cannot comprehend because it has never been designed to comprehend such things. Or maybe I am just another victim, walking willingly into the mouth of something that should not exist. One more body to add to the spirals around the temple, one more smile on a face that should be screaming. Either way, this is goodbye. The forests of the Appalachian Mountains stretch for hundreds of miles, covering thousands of square miles of ancient earth. Somewhere in those forests, in hollows that no map has ever charted, things older than dinosaurs wait for prey. They are patient, they have all the time in the world, and they are very, very hungry. Remember me kindly, if you remember me at all. And if you ever find yourself in these mountains, in these forests, listen to the advice my grandfather gave me. Do not go digging. Some secrets are buried for a reason, and some of them do not want to stay buried. The hollow is singing. I am going home. Found among the personal effects of Daniel Reed, age 33, following his disappearance in the Pisgah National Forest, October 2021. Last known location was a ranger station outside Asheville, where witnesses reported seeing him walk into the forest alone at approximately 2300 hours. Search parties found no trace of him despite extensive efforts covering over 50 square miles. His cabin was discovered locked from the inside, all personal belongings in order. On his kitchen table was a single business card, worn soft as cloth, bearing a symbol that investigating officers could not identify. The card was sent to a federal laboratory for analysis. It was never returned. Daniel Reed is one of 2,147 people who have vanished in the Appalachian mountain forests over the past 5 years. The pattern continues. The disappearances continue. And somewhere in the deep places, where sunlight never reaches and silence weighs heavy as stone, something ancient continues to feed. Ever have one of those moments where you wish you had just stayed in bed? Yeah, that was me 6 months ago. The thought still hits me, usually around dusk when the shadows stretch long and my mind drifts back to that night at Blackwood Pines. I have been trying to make sense of it ever since, though I am not sure anyone could. Name is Silas Huxley, and I was a park ranger at Blackwood Pines for 6 years. Notice I said was. These days I am up north, as far from the Appalachian backwoods as I could get without crossing into Canada. But let me back up, because to understand what happened that night, you need to understand Blackwood Pines itself. The reserve sits deep in a forgotten corner of West Virginia, one of those places that time just skipped over. The nearest town is Hollow Creek, population 400 and shrinking. A dying coal community where the young folks leave as soon as they can scrape together enough gas money to reach somewhere with actual opportunity. The old folks who remain do not talk much about the forest. When they do, they lower their voices and glance toward the tree line like something might be listening. I used to think that was just small-town superstition, the kind of folklore that accumulates in isolated places like dust on abandoned furniture. I do not think that anymore. The forest itself is dense, mostly old-growth pine and hemlock that has been standing since before this country had a name. The trees grow so close together in some sections that they block out most of the sunlight, creating a permanent twilight on the forest floor, even at high noon. Moss covers everything in those deep places, thick and spongy and silent underfoot. Sound behaves strangely in blackwood pines. Sometimes voices carry for miles, bouncing off the hills and hollows until they sound like they are coming from everywhere at once. Other times, you can be standing 20 feet from someone and not hear a word they say. The old-timers call it the whispering, though they never could agree on what exactly was doing the whispering. A river cuts through the heart of the reserve, eventually spilling into what we called Mirror Lake. Though calling it a lake is generous, it is really more of a large pond, maybe 3 acres, fed by underground springs that keep it cold year-round. Cold enough that swimming in it will stop your heart if you stay in too long. Cold enough that nothing much lives in it. Just a few stunted fish and some freshwater crayfish that the locals swear taste wrong. The water is black as oil and perfectly still most days, reflecting the sky and surrounding trees with such clarity that looking at it can make you dizzy, like staring into an infinite drop. People have drowned in Mirror Lake over the years, more than statistics would suggest for a body of water that size. The official reports always say the same thing. Accidental drowning, hypothermia, victim became disoriented. The unofficial stories are different. The locals say the lake takes people. They say if you look into that black water long enough, you will see something looking back. I did not believe any of that when I first took the job. I was 28 years old, fresh out of a bad relationship, and looking for somewhere quiet to lick my wounds. Blackwood Pines seemed perfect. Isolated, peaceful, far from the noise and complications of the life I was trying to escape. The pay was decent, the work was straightforward, and I figured the solitude would do me good. For the first few years, it did. There is something therapeutic about being alone in nature, about having nothing but trees and sky for company. Most days my biggest concern was making sure the few hikers who wandered through did not leave their trash behind or start fires where they should not. The occasional black bear would show up, but they generally kept their distance. It was peaceful, predictable. The kind of work that lets you think without demanding too much of you. I needed that, especially after what happened with my brother. Mike, that was his name. He died of pancreatic cancer 2 years before all this went down. It was quick, brutally quick. By the time they caught it, it had already spread everywhere. I was working at Blackwood Pines when he got sick, and I told myself I could not leave my post, that someone had to watch over the park. The truth is, I was scared. Scared to watch him waste away. Scared to face what was happening. Scared of my own helplessness in the face of something I could not fight or fix. By the time I finally worked up the courage to take some leave, he was already gone. That guilt, it eats at you, you know. Like rust on metal, slowly corroding everything it touches. The job helped in its way. Out there in the woods, alone with nothing but the wind and the birds and my own thoughts, I could almost convince myself that I had made peace with it. Almost. The disappearances started my 3rd year at Blackwood Pines, though I did not recognize them as a pattern at first. People go missing in the wilderness all the time. They get lost, they fall and hurt themselves, they underestimate the weather or the terrain. It is tragic, but it is not mysterious. That is what I told myself when the Henderson boy vanished. Tommy Henderson was 17, a local kid who had been hiking these woods since he could walk. He knew the trails better than most of the rangers, knew which areas to avoid during bear season, knew how to read the weather and the land. He went out one Saturday morning to check on a tree stand his father had set up for deer season and never came back. We searched for 3 days. Dogs, helicopters, every volunteer Hollow Creek could muster. We found his backpack hanging from a tree branch about a mile from Mirror Lake, but that was it. No footprints leading away from it, no signs of struggle, no indication of which direction he might have gone. It was like he had simply ceased to exist, like the forest had opened up and swallowed him whole. The official report said he probably fell into a ravine or an old mine shaft, that the terrain was too rough to recover the body. His mother comes to the ranger station sometimes, even now. She brings flyers with Tommy's picture on them, asks if we have heard anything new. I never know what to tell her. After Tommy, there were others. Not many, maybe one or two a year, but enough to notice if you were paying attention. A couple from Ohio, who parked at the trailhead and never checked in at the campground they had reserved. A solo hiker from Vermont, whose car sat in the lot for 3 weeks before anyone thought to report it. An elderly man from Hollow Creek, who went out to gather mushrooms and did not come home. Each case was different on the surface, but they shared certain details that began to bother me the more I thought about them. All of them disappeared somewhere within a 2-mile radius of Mirror Lake. All of them vanished without a trace, leaving behind belongings but no bodies, no evidence, nothing to suggest where they had gone or what had happened to them. And all of them disappeared on nights when the fog rolled in thick from the hollows, blanketing the forest in a gray shroud that seemed to muffle sound and swallow light. I started keeping a notebook. Dates, locations, weather conditions, moon phases. I'm not sure what I was looking for, but I felt like there had to be a connection, some pattern that would explain what was happening. The other rangers thought I was becoming obsessed, and maybe I was. Bill Martinez, the old-timer who worked the day shift, tried to talk me out of it once. Some things do not have explanations, he said. Some things just are. You keep digging into this, all you are going to find is more questions and less sleep. He was right about the sleep. I stopped getting much of that after I found the cabin. It was late October of my 5th year, maybe 2 weeks before Halloween. The fog had been bad all month, rolling in every evening like clockwork and not burning off until well after sunrise. I was doing my regular patrol, checking the trails for downed trees and washed-out sections, when I noticed something I had never seen before. A path. It was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and it branched off from the main trail at a point I must have passed 1,000 times without noticing. The vegetation on either side was old growth, undisturbed for decades, but the path itself was clear, almost deliberately so, like someone had been maintaining it in secret. I should have radioed in, should have waited for backup before investigating. But something about that path called to me, tugged at some deep part of my brain that operates below the level of conscious thought. Before I knew what I was doing, I was following it, pushing deeper into a part of the forest I had never explored. The path wound through the trees for maybe half a mile, climbing gradually toward a ridge that overlooked Mirror Lake. The fog was thick that day, thick enough that I could barely see 20 feet in front of me, and the silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of wind in the branches. Just my own footsteps, muffled by the carpet of pine needles, and the sound of my breathing, louder than it should have been in that strange stillness. The cabin appeared out of the fog, like something from a dream. It was old, far older than anything else in the park, built from hand-hewn logs that had gone gray with age. The roof was covered in moss, and the windows were dark. But the structure itself was solid, almost impossibly well preserved for something that had clearly been standing for over a century. There was no record of this cabin in any of the park documents I had seen, no mention of it in the historical surveys, no indication that it had ever been officially acknowledged. It was like it existed outside the normal record-keeping of human civilization, a blind spot that everyone had somehow overlooked. I should have turned back. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, to pretend I had never found this place, to let it remain hidden in the fog where it belonged. But I had spent 2 years chasing questions that had no answers, and here was something concrete, something real. I had to know what was inside. The door was not locked. It swung open at my touch, the hinges surprisingly silent for something so old. The smell that came out was not what I expected. I had braced myself for the usual mustiness of abandoned places, the mixture of dust and mold and decay. Instead, the air inside was clean, almost fresh, with a faint undertone of something I could not quite identify. Something organic, but not unpleasant, like the smell of a forest after rain. The interior was a single room, sparsely furnished, but not empty. There was a wooden table in the center, a chair pushed neatly beneath it, a fireplace on the far wall, the stone blackened with old soot, a bed in one corner, the mattress bare but intact, and covering every available surface, filling shelves I had not noticed at first and stacked in piles on the floor, were notebooks. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, their leather covers cracked and faded with age. I picked one up and opened it at random. The handwriting inside was small and precise, the ink faded but still legible. The entries were dated, starting in 1923 and ending abruptly in 1924. They described the forest, the weather, the wildlife, normal observations at first, the kind of notes any naturalist might keep. But as I read further, the entries became stranger. The author began describing sounds in the night, voices that seemed to come from nowhere, lights in the woods that moved against the wind. He wrote about the fog, about how it seemed to have a presence, a weight, like something alive was hiding inside it. The final entries were almost incoherent, the handwriting deteriorating into a barely readable scrawl. "Something is watching me," one of them said. "I can feel its eyes even when I cannot see it. It knows I have seen too much. It is only a matter of time now." The last entry was a single line. "Forgive me. I never should have come here." I spent the next several hours going through the notebooks, trying to piece together what had happened in this cabin and who had written these desperate words. The earliest journals dated back to the 1890s, the most recent to the 1970s. Different handwriting, different authors, but all of them telling variations of the same story. They had come to Blackwood Pines for different reasons: research, solitude, escape. They had found this cabin, or been led to it, and they had stayed, drawn by something they could not explain. And then, one by one, they had begun to see things, to hear things, to understand that they were not alone in these woods, that something ancient and patient was watching them, waiting for them, hungry for something they could not name. None of the journals had happy endings. Some stopped mid-sentence, the author apparently interrupted. Others ended with farewells, apologies, expressions of terror that seemed to leap off the page even decades later. A few contained drawings, crude sketches of shapes that made no sense, geometries that hurt to look at, figures that seemed to shift and move even though they were just marks on paper. I photographed as many pages as I could. Then I took 3 of the notebooks with me when I left. I do not know why I chose those particular 3. Something about them felt important, felt like they contained pieces of a puzzle I was only beginning to glimpse. What I did know, with a certainty that went beyond logic or evidence, was that I needed to understand what was happening in this forest. I needed to know what had happened to all those people who had vanished over the years, what had driven those journal authors to madness and despair, what was lurking in the fog and the darkness of Blackwood Pines. I was about to find out, though not in any way I could have anticipated. The Thursday it happened started like any other. I arrived for the evening shift just as Bill Martinez was finishing up his rounds. Bill was 63 years old and had been with the Park Service longer than I had been alive. He had this way of moving through the forest like he was part of it, barely making a sound even with all his gear. He knew Blackwood Pines better than anyone, knew its moods and its secrets, knew which stories were just campfire tales and which ones had truth at their roots. "Quiet day," he told me as he was packing up his stuff. "Couple of hikers on the North Trail, but they headed out around noon. Weather is supposed to turn nasty tonight." I nodded, going through my pre-shift routine of checking equipment. Flashlight, radio, first aid kit, the usual stuff. "Any word on those sounds people have been reporting?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. There had been complaints over the past few weeks, hikers and locals talking about strange noises in the forest at night. Howling that did not sound like any animal they recognized. Voices that seemed to come from the trees themselves. I had heard some of them too, but I had kept that to myself. Bill shrugged, but there was something in his expression, a tightness around his eyes that I had not seen before. "Nothing concrete," he said, but he paused, choosing his words carefully. Just keep your eyes open tonight, Sam. Something is not right in these woods lately. Coming from anyone else, I might have laughed it off. But Bill was not the type to spook easily. He had seen mountain lions, dealt with aggressive bears, handled every kind of emergency the wilderness could throw at him. If something had him worried, it was worth paying attention to. The sun was already starting to set as I began my first round of checks. The air had that heavy feel to it that comes before a storm, thick and oppressive. The forecast had called for rain, but this felt different. The clouds hanging over the tree line were too dark, too still, like someone had painted them onto the sky. I made my way down to the old ranger station first, the one near Mirror Lake. It was a decrepit thing, built back in the 60s when the park was first established. We mainly used it for storage now, keeping some emergency supplies and backup equipment there. The building had that particular smell that all abandoned places seem to share, a mixture of dust, mold, and decay that no amount of cleaning could quite eliminate. As I approached the station, I noticed something odd. The usual background noise of the forest, the constant chorus of birds, insects, and small animals, was starting to fade. At first it was so gradual I barely noticed it, like someone slowly turning down the volume on a radio. But by the time I reached the station's front door, the silence was absolute. In 6 years of working these woods, I had never heard anything like it. Even during the worst storms, there was always some sound. Wind in the trees, rain on the roof. Something. This was different. This was wrong. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. That was when I heard the first sound. It started low, almost below the threshold of hearing, more vibration than sound. I felt it through the soles of my boots, a deep thrumming that seemed to come from the earth itself. It reminded me of standing near train tracks as a freight train passes, that deep, bone-rattling rumble that you feel more than hear, but there were no trains anywhere near Blackwood Pines. There was nothing that could make a sound like that. At least, nothing that was supposed to be there. Then came the voice. I call it a voice because I do not know what else to call it. But it was not human. It was not any animal I had ever heard either. It was somewhere between a whisper and a scream, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the trees and the ground and the air itself. It said something, words maybe, or something that wanted to be words, syllables that slid together in ways that made my head hurt. I could not understand them, but I felt them resonate in my chest like a second heartbeat. I pulled out my flashlight, though the sun had not completely set yet. The beam seemed weak, barely penetrating the strange twilight that had settled over the forest. I keyed my radio, thinking I should check in with dispatch, but all I got was static. Not the usual kind that comes from being out of range, but a strange pulsing static that seemed to sync up with the vibrations running through the ground. The smart thing would have been to get back to my vehicle and leave. That is what any rational person would have done. But I had spent too many years in these woods to just abandon them at the first sign of trouble. Plus, if there was something dangerous out there, I needed to know about it. We had campers in the park most nights, even if none were registered for that particular evening. I started moving toward Mirror Lake, where the sound seemed to be coming from. The fog started rolling in as I walked, thick gray tendrils that crawled across the ground like something alive. Now, fog is not unusual around water, especially in the evening. But this was different. It moved wrong, flowing against the slight breeze instead of with it, reaching out in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Within minutes, it was thick enough that I had to slow down, careful not to lose my footing on the increasingly slick ground. The voice came again, closer this time, and I caught snatches of what might have been words. Names, maybe. Old names, in a language I did not recognize. The air had gotten thicker too, almost soupy, and there was a smell I could not quite place. Something ancient and organic, like the bottom of a long undisturbed pond, like soil that had not seen sunlight in centuries. I reached the edge of the tree line that bordered Mirror Lake and stopped. The lake was not visible through the fog, but I could sense it out there, that vast stillness, that perfect blackness that reflected nothing and revealed nothing. And standing at the water's edge, barely visible in the murk, were three figures. I raised my flashlight, and they turned toward me. They were men, or at least they had the general shape of men. Tall and gaunt, wearing clothing that seemed to belong to different eras. The one on the left wore a wool coat that might have been fashionable in the 1920s, threadbare and moth-eaten, but somehow still holding together. The one in the middle had on what looked like a ranger uniform, but the design was outdated, matching photographs I had seen from the 1950s. The one on the right was dressed more recently, jeans and a flannel shirt, the kind of outfit any local might wear. Their faces were the worst part. They were not quite right, not quite wrong, just slightly off in ways that made my brain struggle to process what I was seeing. The proportions were normal, the features arranged correctly, but there was no life behind their eyes, no spark of consciousness or awareness. They looked at me the way a photograph looks at you, present but empty, a recording of something that was no longer there. "Hello," I said, and my voice came out strange, flat and echoless in the fog. "Are you folks okay? Do you need help?" They did not respond. They just stood there, staring at me with those hollow eyes, and the fog swirled around them like it was drawn to their stillness. Then the one in the middle, the one in the old ranger uniform, opened his mouth and spoke. "Victor Marlowe," he said, and his voice was wrong too, layered somehow, like multiple recordings playing at slightly different speeds. He walked in the night. He heard the calling. He answered. The second figure, the one in the wool coat, spoke next. Samuel Crow. He searched for answers. He found them. The answers found him. The third figure, the one in modern clothes, was last. Arthur Hale. He ran. They always run. Running does not help. I took a step backward, my hand moving to the sidearm on my hip. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "What is this? What is going on?" The figures did not move, but somehow they seemed closer, like the space between us had contracted without either of us taking a step. The fog was thick enough now that I could barely see the trees behind me, could barely see anything except those three hollow faces and the darkness of the lake beyond them. "We are the ones who stayed," they said. All three voices speaking in unison now, overlapping and harmonizing in ways that made my skin crawl. We heard the calling. We answered. Now we are part of the forest, part of the truth. Soon you will understand. Soon you will be like us. The ground beneath my feet began to vibrate again, that deep thrumming that seemed to come from somewhere far below the surface. The fog thickened, pressing in from all sides, and I became aware of more shapes in the murk, more figures standing at the edges of my vision, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all standing perfectly still, all watching me with those empty eyes. I did what any sane person would do. I ran. I turned and I ran, crashing through the fog and the underbrush with no thought for direction or stealth. Behind me, I heard the figures speaking, their voices carrying through the mist like the forest itself was whispering. "Running does not help," they said. "It never helps, but you will run anyway." They always do. The fog seemed to fight me, growing thicker wherever I went, reaching out with those cold tendrils like it was trying to hold me back. I could hear footsteps behind me, or maybe around me, impossible to tell in that disorienting murk. The vibration in the ground was getting stronger, and that voice, that terrible whispering voice, was getting louder. The words almost comprehensible now, almost something I could understand if I just stopped and listened. I did not stop. I kept running, kept pushing through branches that scraped at my face and roots that tried to trip me. I had lost all sense of direction, all sense of where I was in relation to the trails and the station and the parking lot where my truck was waiting. All I knew was that I had to get away, had to put distance between myself and whatever was happening at that lake. The cabin appeared out of the fog without warning. Not my cabin, not the ranger station, but the other one, the hidden one I had found weeks earlier. It stood there in the murk like it had been waiting for me, its dark windows watching me with something that felt almost like expectation. I did not hesitate. I threw open the door and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me and pressing my back against it like I could hold out whatever was coming with the weight of my body. The silence inside was different from the silence outside. It was not an absence of sound, but a presence of stillness. A calm that seemed to push back against the chaos and terror that had been chasing me through the forest. My breathing slowed. My heartbeat steadied. The vibration in the ground faded to nothing, and the whispers that had been clawing at the edges of my sanity went quiet. For a long moment, I just stood there, gasping and shaking and trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then I became aware that I was not alone in the cabin. He was sitting at the table in the center of the room, an old man with a weathered face and hands that looked like they had been carved from driftwood. He wore clothing that seemed to have no particular era, simple and functional, and he was watching me with eyes that held more years than any human should have to carry. His expression was calm, almost kind, like a grandfather looking at a frightened child. "Sit down," he said, and his voice was normal, reassuringly normal after the horror of the last hour. "You have questions. I have some answers. Not all of them, but some. That is more than most people get." I sat. I do not know why. Maybe because my legs would not hold me anymore. Maybe because there was something in his voice that made me trust him despite everything. Maybe because I was too tired and too scared to do anything else. "Who are you?" I asked. "What is happening out there? What were those things?" The old man smiled, but there was no humor in it, only a deep and ancient sadness. "My name is not important," he said. "I have had many names over the years. What matters is that I have been here a long time, long enough to understand some things about this place, long enough to know that what you saw tonight is just the beginning." He leaned forward, and his eyes caught the faint light filtering through the windows, reflecting it back at me like mirrors. "Blackwood Pines is old," he said. "Older than the trees, older than the mountains, older than the memory of anything that walks or crawls or flies. Before there were people here, before there were animals, before there was anything that we would recognize as life, there was something else, something that does not have a name, because names had not been invented yet, something that exists in the spaces between things, in the silence between sounds, in the darkness between stars." He paused, and I could see him choosing his words carefully, trying to explain something that was beyond normal explanation. "This place, Blackwood Pines, is a thin place. A place where the barrier between what is and what was and what might be is weaker than it should be. The thing that lives here, the thing that has always lived here, can reach through that barrier, can touch our world, can take things from it, can take people." "The disappearances," I said. It was not a question. He nodded. "The ones you know about are only a fraction of the total. People have been vanishing from this forest for as long as people have been coming here. Native Americans, early settlers, loggers, hunters, hikers. Some of them get lost in the normal way, die of exposure or injury, become food for animals. But others," he shook his head, "others are taken, not killed, not exactly, just taken, absorbed, made part of the pattern." "Those things at the lake," I said, "those figures, who were they?" "Once they were people like you," he said. "Victor Marlowe was a naturalist who came here in the 1920s to study the local ecosystem. Samuel Crow was a writer in the 1890s, looking for inspiration for his stories. Arthur Hale was a hiker who disappeared just a few years ago. They heard the calling. They answered. Now they are part of the forest, neither alive nor dead, neither here nor gone. They exist in the spaces between, and they wait." "What do they wait for?" I asked, though I was not sure I wanted to know the answer. "They wait for others," he said. "The thing that lives here is patient. It does not need to hurry. It has been here for millions of years, and it will be here for millions more, but it is hungry, always hungry. It calls out to people, draws them in, adds them to its collection. The ones who resist, who run, who fight, sometimes they escape. Most do not." "And what about you?" I asked. "How are you still here? How are you still yourself?" He smiled again. That sad, weary smile. "I found a way," he said. "A way to exist alongside the thing without being consumed by it. I am not alive, not in the way you understand it, but I am not gone either. I stay in this cabin, I watch, I wait. Sometimes I can help people like you, people who stumble into the truth and have the strength to run from it. I cannot save you, but I can give you information. I can give you a chance." He stood up then, moving to one of the shelves where the notebooks were stacked. He pulled one out, newer than the others, its leather cover still supple and uncracked. "Take this," he said, holding it out to me. "Read it, understand it, and then leave this place and never come back." "What is in it?" I asked, taking the notebook but not opening it. "Everything I have learned in my years here," he said. "Everything I have pieced together about what this thing is and how it operates. It is not complete. There are mysteries I have never solved, questions I have never been able to answer. But it is enough. enough to know what you are dealing with, enough to protect yourself if you are careful. The fog outside had begun to thin, and through the windows I could see the first gray light of approaching dawn. The night had passed without my noticing, hours compressed into what had felt like minutes. The old man saw me looking and nodded. "It does that," he said. "Time works differently near the thin places. Another reason to stay away. Another reason to forget what you have seen and live your life somewhere else, somewhere normal, somewhere safe." I wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand everything, but I could see that he was done talking. He had given me what he could, and now it was up to me to decide what to do with it. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it, for helping me, for explaining. He shook his head. "Do not thank me yet," he said. "You are not out of the woods. Not literally, not figuratively. The thing knows you now. It has tasted you, felt the shape of your mind. It will not forget. It will be waiting, always waiting, for you to come back, for you to let your guard down, for you to answer the calling. So go now, while the sun is rising and the barrier is at its strongest, and do not look back." I left the cabin and walked through the forest as the dawn broke over the mountains. The fog had dissipated almost entirely, and the birds were singing again, and it was hard to believe that the nightmare of the previous night had really happened. But I could feel something different in the air, a weight that had not been there before, an awareness that I was being watched even in the bright morning light. My truck was where I had left it, in the parking lot near the main ranger station. Bill was there, just arriving for his shift, and he took one look at my face and knew something had happened. I did not tell him everything. I could not. But I told him enough that he went pale and sat down heavily on the station steps, shaking his head. "I always knew," he said quietly. "Always felt like there was something wrong with this place. But I never let myself believe it, never let myself look too close, because if I did..." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. I put in my resignation that afternoon. The Park Service tried to talk me out of it, offered me transfers, counseling, administrative leave. I took none of it. I packed up my things, loaded them into my truck, and drove north. I did not stop until I had put 500 miles between myself and Blackwood Pines. That was 6 months ago. I live in Minnesota now, in a small cabin on the edge of a lake that is nothing like Mirror Lake. The water here is clear and cold and full of life. Fish jump in the evenings, and loons call across the water, and the silence is the normal kind of silence, the kind that comes from being far from cities and highways, not the terrible waiting silence of Blackwood Pines. I read the notebook the old man gave me. Read it cover to cover, then read it again. He was right that it does not explain everything, but it explains enough. Enough to know that what I encountered was real. Enough to know that there are places in this world where the rules we think we understand do not apply. Enough to know that I can never go back. The notebook talks about other thin places, other spots around the world where the barrier is weak and the things beyond can reach through. It talks about the calling, about how the thing communicates with potential victims, draws them in with whispers and visions and dreams. It talks about how to resist, how to recognize the signs, how to protect yourself. Most importantly, it talks about how to stay away, because that is the only real defense. Distance, ignorance, the willingness to turn your back on mysteries that should not be solved, questions that should not be answered, truths that should not be known. I try to follow that advice. I stay away from forests, from isolated places, from anywhere the fog rolls in thick and the silence gets too heavy. I sleep with the lights on, and I avoid looking at reflective surfaces after dark. I do not go near water when the moon is full. The dreams are the hardest part. I still have them, almost every night. Dreams where I am back at Mirror Lake, standing at the water's edge while the fog closes in around me. Dreams where Victor Marlowe and Samuel Crowe and Arthur Hale are standing beside me, their hollow eyes fixed on something in the distance. Dreams where I hear the calling, clear and beautiful and terrible, and I want nothing more than to answer it, to walk into the water, to let the darkness take me, to become part of the pattern. I always wake up before I do. So far, the notebook warns about the dreams. It says they will never stop entirely, that once the thing has touched your mind, it leaves a mark, a connection that can never be fully severed. It says the calling will get stronger over time, harder to resist, more compelling. It says that some people last decades before they finally give in, others only last months. I do not know how long I will last. I do not know if the defenses I have built, the distance I have put between myself and Blackwood Pines, will be enough. All I know is that I will keep fighting. I will keep resisting. I will keep waking up from those dreams and forcing myself to stay in this cabin, in this world, in this life that I have built so far from everything I used to know. Sometimes, on particularly clear nights, I sit on my cabin's porch and look up at the stars. They used to comfort me. All that vast beauty, all that infinite possibility. Now, when I look at the darkness between the stars, I cannot help but wonder if something is looking back. I think about the old man in the cabin, about his sad smile and his weary eyes, and his willingness to spend an eternity watching over a place where terrible things happen. I think about Victor Marlowe and Samuel Crowe and Arthur Hale, about the lives they lived before they heard the calling, about the families and friends who never knew what really happened to them. I think about Tommy Henderson and all the other people who vanished in those woods, who became part of the pattern, who exist now in some state that is neither living nor dead. And I think about the thing itself, the ancient presence that dwells in the thin place, patient and hungry and eternal, waiting for the next person to wander too close, waiting for the next mind to touch, waiting for the next victim to answer the calling. It is still out there. Blackwood Pines is still there, still drawing people in with its dark beauty and its terrible secrets. The government shut down the park after I left, citing environmental concerns, but people still go there. Hikers and hunters and thrill seekers who do not believe the stories, who think they are too smart or too strong to fall victim to whatever took all those others. Some of them come back, most do not. I keep a file of news clippings, reports of disappearances in and around Blackwood Pines. The numbers are higher than they should be, far higher than any statistical model could explain. People go in and do not come out. Their cars sit in parking lots and their belongings sit in campsites, and the searches turn up nothing. The official explanations are always the same: lost in the wilderness, presumed dead, case closed. But I know the truth. I know what is waiting in the fog. I know what is calling from the depths of Mirror Lake. And I know that someday, maybe soon, and maybe far in the future, the calling will become too strong to resist. I will get in my truck and I will drive south. I will find my way back to that forgotten corner of West Virginia, back to the dense forests and the black water, and the silence that is not silence. I will stand at the edge of Mirror Lake and I will hear my name spoken in that terrible, beautiful voice, and I will answer. I do not want to. God help me, I do not want to. But I can feel it sometimes, that pull, that longing, that need to return to the place where I lost something I cannot name and found something I cannot forget. The old man said some people last decades. I hope I am one of them. I hope I have years left before the calling becomes too loud to ignore. But hope is a fragile thing, and the nights are long, and the dreams are getting stronger. If you are reading this, if you have somehow found my story, please listen to what I'm about to tell you. Stay away from Blackwood Pines. Stay away from thin places, from forests that feel wrong, from bodies of water that reflect nothing. If you hear a voice in the silence, a calling in the dark, do not answer, do not investigate, do not try to understand. Just run. Run as fast and as far as you can and do not look back. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some truths are not meant to be known. Some places are not meant to be visited. I learned that lesson too late. But maybe you can learn from my mistake. Maybe you can avoid the fate that is waiting for me. The fate that has already claimed so many others. Go live your life somewhere bright and loud and full of people. Stay away from the silence. Stay away from the fog. Stay away from the darkness between the stars. Because something is out there. Something ancient and patient and hungry. And it is always, always calling. The last thing I want to tell you is this. I thought about burning the notebook the old man gave me. I thought about destroying the evidence, pretending none of this ever happened, trying to forget what I saw and what I learned, but I could not do it. The information in that notebook might save someone's life someday. It might help someone understand what they are dealing with before it is too late. So instead of burning it, I made copies. I sent them to people I trust, people who work in fields where they might encounter the unexplainable, rangers and researchers, and people who investigate the strange and terrifying corners of our world. Maybe they will think I am crazy. Maybe they will dismiss my story as the ramblings of a traumatized mind. But maybe, just maybe, one of them will listen. One of them will take it seriously. One of them will be prepared when they encounter something like what I encountered. And that has to be worth something, right? That has to matter. Because if my story helps even one person, if my suffering means that someone else can escape the fate that is coming for me, then maybe this whole nightmare will have served some purpose. Maybe there is meaning in the darkness after all. Or maybe I am just telling myself that to feel better. Maybe there is no meaning, no purpose, no reason for any of this. Maybe the thing in Blackwood Pines is just what it is, a force of nature, indifferent to our suffering, indifferent to our hopes and fears, and desperate need to believe that our lives matter. I do not know. I do not think anyone knows. All I can do is tell my story and hope that someone, somewhere, is listening. My name is Silas Huxley. I was a park ranger at Blackwood Pines for 6 years. I saw something in that forest, something that changed me, something that marked me, something that is calling me back even now as I write these words. And I am afraid. I am so afraid. But I am still here. I am still fighting. And as long as I can still wake up from the dreams, as long as I can still resist the calling, as long as I can still sit on this porch and watch the sun rise over a lake that is not Mirror Lake, I will keep going. One day at a time, one night at a time, until the day I cannot anymore. Wish me luck. And please, please, stay out of the woods.